Oh, there we go. Hold on. I've almost got it.
Almost there. See. I don't. Oh,
Almost there.
stay on target.
Almost there. All
Lock
right.
S foils in attack position. All right, let me update my
Here we
game and
go.
everything to just chatting. Guys, this is Dr. Mick. Can you say hello, guys?
Hello, guys. Oh wait.
Son of a Kate, listen, you.
Oh man, we're off. We're already off to a bad start.
Man, it's ruined. It's ruined. It's good to see you, dude.
Good to see you too.
Thanks for coming along. I am like completely not set up at the moment, so you'll have to
Totally fine.
allow for
Want me to
my
dance for everybody a little bit here?
my lack of. Look at you just dancing. He's getting down,
Hey,
guys.
I gotta keep the people entertained.
Well, there's only a couple of us. We don't have too many people here this time, so that's fine.
You're right. Yeah, just us.
It's just us. It's basically just us. So, guys, this is again Dr. Mick, and if I can intro you for a moment, he's a licensed family and couple therapist out of Illinois. He can only treat people in Illinois. So if you're looking for a therapist and you're not there, then don't bother. But he actually does have a segment where he can help you find a therapist. But also, he is ethically bound because you are not his patients to be limited on certain questions and things that you ask that might be crossing into too much of a doctor-patient relationship. So that's where I'll step in and give my uneducated opinion, and he will sit there and judge me silently. But we like to, he is a good friend of mine and someone who I feel like I got really close to really fast. And I apologize if you're like, whoa, back up, buddy.
No, I agree.
I need space.
I agree completely.
But we kind of just hit it off. We clicked really well. And he is passionate about mental health, and I am passionate about mental health. He is mentally healthy, and I am not. So it's really good yin yang sort of thing. And
I guess that's one way to put it.
I don't know. That's a presumptuous. Maybe you're not mentally healthy. I still haven't updated my title, but if there's anything you feel like I left out, then feel free to jump in and correct it.
I think sometimes it's just for anybody in here who has not met me before, sometimes I think it's helpful for people to know that I realize I don't look like a therapist, for one. Two, I have a PhD in human development, which informs a lot of the way in which I show up to these types of conversations and the things that I say. I also am a former assistant professor at Northwestern University. I am no longer an assistant professor there, but I actually teach graduate classes and have taught undergraduate classes before in the past as well. And I also have 3 years of volunteer experience on the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. So I feel like at this point in my career, I have a relatively well-rounded experience of the mental health arena and have worked in a variety of contexts. So I'm not a one-trick pony anymore, but it's on me to tell people when I can't answer the questions. So I don't mind any questions that come my way. It's up to me to tell you whether I can answer it or not. But Zine is, in fact, a good friend of mine as well, and I agree that we hit it off. And I got to give you kudos, as I did last time, for being somebody who I think is the embodiment of how a non-therapist should be a mental health advocate. Like, I actually really admire the way in which you talk about mental health, share your own experiences, and provide so much support to so many awesome people. I have no doubt in my mind that the awesomeness of your community is partly due to that. And so you deserve a lot of credit too, as a non-therapist. And just so you guys know, Zine says a lot of things that, like, as a therapist, I read and go, yep, that's awesome. So Zine's kind of like he could be a therapist if you ever wanted to go that direction, and I would endorse it.
I walk the line there, and I never know because it's like one is I don't think I have it in me to go through and get a doctorate degree in order to reach that point. But there is definitely a huge interest for me in psychology and just the way that we work. And I feel like, there's a line of arrogance or hubris or whatever, but I feel like it's something that I kind of take to and seem to have a little bit of a natural strength to. And so I leverage that and try and use that in the community to help resolve disputes. Like, that's one thing that I see a lot is just people in groups, and particularly, communities as large as I've managed to get, drama between interpersonal drama can really tear those things apart, and that's something that I find that my management skills and my people skills really kind of come together and help. But I appreciate you saying that, and just, I mean, it means a lot because actually that was something that I kind of like to kind of just start. That was something that I realized, and we might have touched on it before, but where I spend a lot of time in kind of that mental health world and thinking about it or dealing with people at that level. But I try and be clear about it, but I'm just kind of not making it up as I go, but it's my best uneducated guess, right? Like I think this
Yeah.
is what's going on. This is what I see. This is how you seem to be behaving. I don't know that I don't have a degree to back up my interpretation. And so it's one of the things that I've appreciated for you is be able to kind of in hindsight go to you with conversations and say, am I on track here? Am I on the right path? And do you agree? Understanding you can't weigh in with an actual assessment or anything like that, but if you're just kind of looking for that. And then I think, wait, that's validation seeking behavior. And then I go in this whole
Oh
cycle and I don't know
God.
what to do. Like, I'm so scared to ask, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I just seeking validation? Like, I think that's the one, like, phobia you've given me more than anything else. Is this just validation seeking behavior, isn't
Oh man. Well, okay. So I'm
it?
gonna say this to you, but I'm gonna also say because I'll bet you there are so many people right now in chat who are probably shaking their head, going like, "Uh-huh, uh-huh," because I think a lot of people have started to worry about that as I've said it. Like, here's the thing: validation's okay. Reassurance from people is okay. Affirmation is a wonderful thing. I think we all need it in relationships.
I
The
agree with that.
operative word in that is excessive.
Ah,
And so it's when people do it because they have no other means of getting reassurance. Mostly what I'm saying with that is like self. So it's one thing to have a general sense of like, I'm going to use you as an example here. Like, you'll come to me and be like, "Hey, I did this thing and I want some thoughts and I'm wondering if you could help me out because I think I did a pretty good job." And I think the part of that that is so important is that I am then there to either confirm some level of reassurance that you've given yourself already because you're a pretty smart dude, you know what you're talking about, or like you're open to my feedback.
yeah, absolutely.
But the difference is if you came to me every single time and your entire sense of whether you did something correctly or not was completely reliant on
Right.
me, and as a result, you were constantly reaching out to me, even in the most minute ways, that's where that becomes problematic. So affirmation and consultation stuff is totally fine. It's excessive reassurance seeking that is basically reflecting a person is devoid of self reassurance where they're not getting confirmation for something they're already thinking, as opposed to like, I'm living and dying by your acceptance of me. And that's a really dangerous spot to be in.
Right. So to restate that in what I would say is layman terms, or my interpretation is just that when people don't have their a strong enough sense of self or sense of self worth, that they then build and basically base their self worth off of the feedback that they've given, and it's that immediate feedback. So it's like I mean, the they're only as good as their last performance review on whoever they
Yes.
sought validation from. If I vacuumed poorly and you were like, "Man, you did a crappy job," and then I just feel terrible for the rest of the day because all that mattered was making you happy and I didn't meet your needs, then that's where it's like, again, you've got to have a sense of self to be if you're going to be happy. Otherwise, your other people are responsible for your happiness, and not only is that not a way to live very well for yourself because you're dependent on other people, but it also is like an unfair pressure on them to always be you're basically requiring and pulling from them an energy, in my opinion, where it's exhausting to have those people that are just like, did I do good? Did I do good? Did I do good? Like, again, there's a level
Yeah.
of affirmation. Absolutely, you did great. That's a fine feedback. But you come back the next time with, I did this too. Is that right? Yes, you know that. Like,
Well, and
yes.
that's where it gets even trickier because to use your vacuuming example, imagine you actually vacuumed well, objectively, but then you come to
Oh,
me
I do.
and I'm having a bad day and I'm just kind of in a shitty mood and I go, "No, you did a shitty job." And if you don't have the self-worth and some level of affirmation of self there to kind of try to have some context in the way you look at the vacuuming job, like you won't take my response into context. Instead, you'll personalize it. And personalization is a form of cognitive distortion. So if you over personalize it, now all of a sudden you've done a good job, but you're not reaffirming that for yourself because you're hanging by whatever it is that I said and not taking my stance into account. And it does get exhausting to the person who is constantly the one trying to reaffirm, which often means that they will distance. And then if you're a person who seeks reassurance from that person, you're going to keep chasing. And that's where you see this awful, what's called a positive feedback loop that I end up seeing in therapy constantly with couples. So,
And that's
not that we're a couples lead, but just to use that example.
it's fine. And that's pretty. Isn't that a pretty common behavior though? Like, isn't that something you see in a lot of people where they don't have that strong enough sense of self worth? Like, it's just. I mean, I
Mhm.
would say as a general. Obviously, there's people, and it probably it depends on certain things, right? Like they can have a good strong sense of self on things they know they're good at, but also be constant. Did I do good enough? Did I do good enough? And not believe in themselves on other things. So
Mhm.
but I think I see that quite a bit as well as I kind of look at the community and as I watch people interact is just that like be able to chart your course and to be yourself without necessarily needing that those other people to lift you up, right? And
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
well, I mean, I can get kind of theoretical here for a second if you
Oh,
want and talk about a
theorize on me.
theory.
Do it.
Okay, so there's this theory that gets talked about a lot in couple and family therapy. The therapy model is called Bunyan therapy, but there's theories that go along with this. One of the theories that's in that is this concept called differentiation, which is basically where when we move into adulthood, there's this idea that we basically have to begin to acknowledge ourselves as being autonomous from the group. It's acknowledgement that we are simultaneously independent, but also part of a system and part of like microsystems within that big system. And the theory talks mostly about family relationships, but basically what differentiation says is that if you don't separate what emotional experience is yours from that of the groups, you will live and die by the group's anxiety because you will be fused to that anxiety, which means that like if you basically that example I gave where like I'm having a bad day and I'm angry and you come to me, if you will not separate my anger and frustration from your own sense of pride and may actually it will override your pride with my anxiety. And so one of the things I'm having to do a lot in therapy is help people differentiate from their systems of origin or the systems that they're currently in so they can recognize what their own emotional experience and their own assessment of a thing is and then compare that to the assessment of the system and then merge those two things together and see it with more nuance and context. So that's one big long fancy way of saying like that's another reason why it's really important to recognize how we are feeling about something and to engage in our own assessments of things so that we can recognize them as our own as the autonomous adults that we are. Harder for a child to do that, but in adulthood that's theoretically an ideal that we're all working towards is differentiation. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
One of the things that that you'll get into at times, and where I get left behind is you get into systems, and
Yeah.
you talk about systems a lot, and I'm not sure. Like I'm not saying this is feedback. Like I love what you do, but I think anytime you start talking about systems, I don't know that many of us can keep up with that because that like most of us don't really think of personal interaction and person to person as a system per se. I mean, obviously there's rules unspoken and spoken and nuance and everything like that, but to define it as a structure and analyze it there, I think that's a very, I mean, obviously academic and educated way to look at it. I don't know that many of us are very good at identifying that. Is there anything that you would say like ways that we could leverage that or improve that, or is it really like no, you got to train to really kind of be able to identify those things?
Oh man. Dude, that's such a good question. I appreciate that question so much. Um
Thank you for that affirmation.
And actually good feedback for me too, because it is so innately in
Yeah.
my head at this point that it's always helpful to know that that can lose people. And actually the reason it loses, like, there's a reason I had to go to school for 2 years to get a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, because that basically had to beat the individual way of looking at the world that we're conditioned to look at the world as, particularly in the United States, out of me, so that I could start to see things as embedded within interactions and within relationships. The best way that I could describe this to people is that you have to think about it as like almost like physics of how people's interactions work. Where basically, like for every interaction, there is an equal or opposite re-interaction that happens as a result. So if there's a way that you show up in a relationship, let's say, for example, I'm clingy and I'm constantly pursuing. I, as a systems thinker, as a marriage and family therapist, am also thinking about what is the systemic mechanism that reinforces and holds that in place. So I would look at the pursuing as serving some type of function in the relationship, meaning that it could be that the other person is distancing. So this person's response to pursue is because this other person is putting emotional distance, or vice versa. So, and looking at things as being in a context of interaction as opposed to just a linear thing that happens. So sometimes people critique that as saying like, "Oh, well, that means wouldn't that, Dr. Mick, mean that you're very victim blaming? Because it means that like if a person's in an abusive relationship, you're going to blame the person who's being abused for staying." And that is not true. But there is some level of systemic understanding for the way that those things work. And I think we have a much broader and better view of the world the quicker any of us can start to get into that mindset, of like we are always embedded within relationships and systems. We're not individuals in vacuums and silos. Literally everything we do is interactional in some way. So it's just a once it clicks, it's this really like intoxicating way of viewing the world, but it is something that you basically have to train people to do because we're so heavily inundated with an individualistic idea of things in the United States, especially. So I can see how it would run counter. So
It's
I don't know if I did an ample job there describing it to you the way that you were kind of asking about it, but it is. I think it's a great way to look at the way the world works.
interesting. The and chat feedback was one, Honey Badger. I don't think you're supposed to be like, ooh, that's me when he's talking about the people showing up clingy. I don't think that's. I mean, just it's good to be able to self-analyze, but let's, and then people, saying, oh, so he's looking into my soul tonight. That's great. What's interesting though is you're talking about very, again, it's obviously not a linear thing because there's emotion and very non-rational forces, but at the same time there is a structure to it, and you're building it into a structure and kind of looking at it, the pieces and the interactions and stuff.
Yes.
I see that, like I see a lot of that, and what you're describing is it's like it's not what I do, but it's also describing the same thing where I know if you give this feedback, then that's probably going to evoke this response. And I mean, like A and B, but I don't have that perspective to structure it the way that you do. And so I can usually like want to, I can, I know the art of diplomacy of letting someone have my way and talking them through, okay, here's where you are, and here's how I'm going to let you decide to be where I want you to be, kind of thing. And I suppose that's all using that structure and stuff. It's just hard for me to visualize kind of it as defined as that, I guess.
Well, you've learned to do that and navigate that based on prior experiences
Hmm.
in various relationships. Like you've sort of learned what works, what doesn't, how to kind of be in tune with how certain subsystems work. I mean, even from a streamer type point of view, right? Like there's the mod subsystem, there's the community subsystem, there's the lurkers, there's the people who chat often, there's the fellow streamers. Like even that, right? Like you sort of have to understand context because if you go in guns blazing in one area with a where it just doesn't make any sense, but there's others where you feel closer to and you've sort of learned that there are various reinforcement mechanisms there that make that more possible. I mean, you're literally changing your behavior as the result of the system in which you're embedding yourself in. And it's my job as a systemic therapist to look at that process and to be curious not just about you, but about that subsystem you're in, or why is it that this type of person brings this out of you versus other people bringing this out of you, and what makes you how do you choose to do that versus something else, right? Like
Right.
it's just it's a more complex way of looking at things, but I think it really expands uh our understanding of ourselves.
Right. Someone asked, I know it was Mary. I'm just looking for the comment, but they asked basically, how does anxiety factor into or affect those systems? And it's kind of a broad question, but
Oh,
is
it's a great one though.
okay.
That question actually probably didn't realize it, but anxiety is actually the operative emotional experience in the theory I was talking about. The idea is that as systems become more distressed or move through transitions together, there is an uptick in anxiety. And that when people experience anxiety, they will behave in certain ways that have basically been conditioned by their family of origin. And so, if people can't identify if the anxiety is theirs versus the anxiety of the groups or the anxiety of somebody else's, they'll start to act upon that anxiety in a way that may or may not make it worse as a result. So the role of anxiety is actually it fuels a lot. If you go with Boehnian therapy, like it fuels basically all of the interactions and all of the choices we make is a response to anxiety. And our goal is always to neutralize anxiety in that type of model so that people don't uh, feel it, even though I think that's a critique I have about that. But like that's why people will triangulate other people. And to break that down and not use the official term for it, like basically that would be like, let's say me and Zine get it into an argument on stream about something and we disagree.
I don't
And
agree with
instead
that.
of so chat, what do you think about the fact that Zine just said that? So I just triangulated chat into a potential disagreement we had as a way to stabilize or what I think is going to dampen the anxiety between us in the dyad that we have. And we do this all the
Huh.
time in our relationships because we think if we pull in a third party, it's going to minimize the anxiety we experience. And in some ways it does. But what it actually does is holds in place the anxiety we have in the dyadic relationship. So triangulation is just an avoidance seeking behavior. So these are the types of things that people and families will do constantly without realizing it because it works. It's a reinforcement mechanism. So if I go to chat instead of to you, I don't have to deal with the intensity between the two of us, which means my anxiety goes down and I offload that anxiety to chat. And then chat has to carry that anxiety on my behalf. And then they will act in whatever way they're going to act in the response to the anxiety as opposed to me taking ownership and accountability for how I sit with anxiety and handle it and how you do. So that's one example of how anxiety can actually fuel problematic relationship patterns. So
Right.
I don't know. It's cool stuff. I know I'm
No, no,
going
no,
on and
no,
on
no,
about
no.
this stuff,
It
but I get
actually,
super jazzed about it.
that's great. Like the passion is interesting, and honestly, I did follow that, but I did have to laugh because there was a comment. Love how Zena's just staring at the screen like, "Hey, you lost me at hello." But no, I kept up with a little bit more than that. Um, so don't triangulate on your dyadic relationships as one shouldn't do. Is what we're saying. Like come on, guys.
Yeah.
Jeez,
Yeah.
get your shit together.
Especially if you are a parent and you triangulate your children into your co-parenting
Oh
relationship.
yeah,
Horrible thing to do.
right.
So,
So
and people do it all the time without realizing it.
So having launched kind of straight in because this is just to help chat kind of catch up. This is how Dr. Mick and I are. We just start talking and we just have fun. But you guys, I've set my sending a message reward to 1 point, so any one of you can send a message up. Keep in mind, please, we are going to have far more comments and questions than we are ever going to be able to answer, and there will be times where we just go off on tangents and just conversate. But you are a part of it, and if you have something you really want to try and get escalated up, again, you be keeping in mind I get swamped, and there's like
Yeah.
400 questions, and it's like I can do 20 sort of thing. So please be patient with us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I really do appreciate you coming on, and particularly I think it's important. I mean, one of the things that we kind of started this with is just with all the insecurity, which translates to anxiety in the world, to with the pandemic and the economic structure and everything like that. We originally kind of had that conversation of just how are ways to try and cope with anxiety. That was the motivator for starting this. And now I find myself, I believe, different from last time in that it's a little bit more of a personal question. How does one handle job loss? And seeing their life's
Yeah.
work disappear in front of, but I mean, that is something like, again, you've talked about and I apologize if I'm butchering this, but you've talked about anxiety is based off of insecurity. It's fear of the future and the unknown, right?
Yeah, it's your
Or,
brain's
or
response to the unknown.
a feeling of non-security, not like insecurities, like, but
Yes.
the unknown and
Uncertainty would be the better word.
fine,
It
okay, Mr.
Well, no,
Vocabulary.
but I see what you're saying. We'll encapsulate it in uncertainty. That would
I don't
probably
use
be
these big words like uncertainty. Okay, it's just next you're gonna be like. He pulls
the
out
weird.
triangulate my dyadic relationship over here. Chat, what do you think of him correcting me on this right here? But
No, chat, don't answer him. Don't answer that, chat. Tell me how you feel about it.
oh,
Don't tell.
don't. Wow. Okay.
What I love about that though, dude,
Mhm.
is that what that probably just did, I'm sure, because I know it would happen if I was watching, is that probably pulled some kind of emotional response out of some people in chat. And if you sit with that for a second, that is partly your response to being triangulated. And that's actually a really good thing to be able to recognize is what it feels like to be triangulated, because then you can detriangulate yourself. So anyway, as you were saying before we
Chat
got into the
said,
whole uncertainty
"Zine,
thing,
fight your own battles." All right, fair enough.
way to go, Mary.
But
Proud of you.
but anyway, that's how, like, we'll try and use this, send a message and to try and catch up on stuff, back and forth. And I'm just gonna hop around, grab messages. If I miss yours, I'm sorry.
Zine,
But
was you mentioning the job loss thing? Like, were you going somewhere with that?
I was making it. It was a poor attempt that I kind of aborted halfway through. But I was joking because I did lose my job between our last conversation and this one. So it is a little more of a personal thing. But I'm not.
Sure.
I feel like I'm handling it okay. But what was interesting there, and to kind of, I mean, one is there's like 20% of people are dealing with it right now. Like unemployment, at least in the U.S., which is where all my, but it is reaching into the 20% range, like levels not seen since the Great Depression kind of thing. And if you think about that, that's that's an insane number of people that are dealing with job loss right now, and the inherent insecurities or uncertainties, if you will, that come with that, and just whether it's not knowing how to pay your bills or how you're going to survive. And first off, keep in mind, guys, and I realize it's just it's very nebulous, but things work out. We figure it out. We get through things, and it takes work, and it takes there's tough times, but we get to the other side of these moments. And so at the very least, in a broader sense, we get to the other side of the river and stop getting water up our shoes. I don't know the metaphor. It's just a bus under the bridge at this point. But I love
you took me, and that was a ride. That was a ride. Like
I
could
love
feel
doing
myself
that.
trying to grasp what I was. Geez, then you threw the bus under the bridge, and like,
Just
oh my god,
the mixed metaphors. I love doing it because it makes
that was so good.
people think that they're like, yeah, wait, what?
Wow,
Because
I wasn't awake. I am
you
now.
think you're along, and then you realize you're not. But one of the things that I tell people, if Dr. Mick recovers, one of the things that I advise people is either look higher or look lower if you're in that point where anxiety is overwhelming you. And it depends on what your reaction to anxiety is. But basically, if it helps, look at the broader picture and see that we've been through difficult times. We've been through all this. You've been through difficult times. Maybe not specifically what's happening, but you've been through hard times, and you come out on the other side, and you come out, probably stronger, more experienced, more capable. And so, it's all temporary. And when you realize that many of those concerns you carry with you moment to moment, and that you worry over moment to moment, they just don't fucking matter in our life. Like, yeah, we need to handle it, and we will, but it's not really something you're going to remember a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, whatever that time frame is, because they're small, short-term concerns and stressors. And so if it helps you, then look kind of past that and rise above it. Alternatively, if the more you look at the bigger picture, the more anxious you get, or the more uncertain or overwhelmed, then for me, it's compress that worldview and come to only work on the things that you can handle right now. And that might be, if you are at a full flooded, can't cope state, It might be just focusing on your breathing from moment to moment. Like, I mean, I've had times in
Mhm.
my life where I've come down to that. I'm just going to get to this next breath. I'm going to get through these next two. And you just, as you kind of recenter and regain yourself, then you start bringing in and bringing more of your life back in. But you can shut out down to where it's like nothing else matters. Just breathe. And then as you regain that coping ability, then you kind of start factoring in things, and you just handle it as you raise, as you expand back open. So that is a very general sense to just kind of talk about, what I see in these times is, if you were came out like, hey, I'm just really stressed, I can't handle what's going on, that would be my advice, just at the top, without needing any sort of what's happening with you specifically, like just a general coping mechanism. Um, and then I guess, do you wish to affirm or deny that particular perspective, or perhaps just expand upon?
Doing it again.
I know. That's fine.
No, it's okay. I'm just trying to make you a little more paranoid. No,
No,
you're
no. Wait,
I
I'm paranoid?
no. No, no.
Or am I?
We'll get there. Um I no, and what you're saying is actually very true. I have had to have two so I'm going to kind of weave together two things that
Mhm.
you started talking about, because I've had to have this conversation a lot with people lately, both professionally and just in personal life. Um to address first the like control what you can control thing, that is 100% excellent advice, because what we tend to do when we are in a position like this, especially in the pandemic here, is like we live either in the past or in the future. People tend to go in either direction because it's a little bit less intense than the present. So they will usually go to back to the past mentally to try to manipulate the past and ask a whole bunch of what ifs. What if I had done this? What if this had happened? What would I change? And really, that's futile, because you can't change the past. Like, that is a fact. I've never met a person who was able to go back in the past and change it. So it's a frame that you want to take on looking at the past is, what can I learn from the thing that I'm paying attention to that was in the past that I can choose to utilize in the present? The future is a bit of a tricky one too, because if we spend too much time in the future, it takes us away from the choices we have to make in the present that will actually inevitably lead to what's going to happen in the future. Like, the future only is an amalgam of choices we make in the present. So what Zine's saying is 100% true, because what we want to focus on right now is have your your focus directed toward what you can control, what you can influence. In a lot of ways right now, that's yourself. And if it does get down to the micro level of taking breaths or taking a shower or whatever it is that you got to do, super important to do that and focus on what you can control in the context of things that are uncontrollable. So if you lost your job and you didn't have control over that, then focusing on what can I control right now to move through this process so that I can either move toward whatever goal I have, whether it's to find another job or to kind of weather the storm here. But what are the choices I can make, as opposed to sitting and waiting for other things to make choices for me? With that, Zine, I want to say too, like, as I'm sure there are people in chat that have also lost their jobs right now, and I know you have too, is like, we have, because in the United States we have this tendency to be so focused on what people do. I mean, often the first question people ask when they're getting to know somebody is, "What do you do?" We're not even just talking about people losing a job. We're talking about people losing a sense of identity
Mm-hmm.
and losing a big chunk of how you answer the question of who you are, and that cuts super deep for a lot of people. And if there's anxiety and sadness and grief or whatnot that comes along with that, that is totally normal and common and is worth paying attention to, because it is more than just, oh, well, I shouldn't be so bummed. Like, you probably have lost, not you, the collective you, have probably lost some sense of your identity and are feeling lost in that. And that's a really scary and vulnerable place to be. And most people aren't prepared for that in the way that, you can prepare for losing a job, but most people don't prepare for losing a chunk of their identity. And so a lot of patience and self compassion is super important with this. And controlling what you can control will help ease some of the anxiety that comes along with that.
And I feel that, like, what was interesting is I was like, I'll be done, around 9:30 or whatever. And you were like, oh, I can't make it till 11. And that's, I mean, it was just like, okay, let me figure out what to do at the time. And so I just kind of chatted with chat, and they got me off on some programming rants and things like that, where I was talking about experiences from my job. And honestly, there were a couple of points where I was giving an opinion or something that it's like, I know that my opinion is valid. I know that it's right. I know that, like I have many, many years of experience, but there's some part of me that's like, and I just got let go. So does that mean that I was wrong? Does that mean that I don't have it, any places like, again, and that's that sense of identity that you're talking about, I think, of just, like that invalidation per se
Hmm.
of, I mean, I had 16 years there. I'm pretty sure I did a decent job, and it was a financial thing that they looked at, and they're like, well, you've been here for so long that your, just yearly raises and stuff like that have made you to where you're a very prime candidate for promoting to customer. And so it
I,
really did.
oh man, I haven't heard that saying in a long time. That just
I promoted to
I don't
cut.
mean to laugh, but
No, no,
oh
no.
my
You're,
god,
you're,
I
to,
I
you're
heard that so long ago, and I've never thought about it since. And you just saying that,
the one that I like, I heard that, I think I picked that up from chat, but the one that I went with initially was they invited me to seek other opportunities.
yes,
They encouraged me strongly, but like you were saying, it's very uh, dehumanizing is a little bit dramatic, but it's you lose that sense of you, you lose a
sure,
part of you, and I don't know whether it's American culture and different on other places, but it's very that your job is very much a part of who you are and how you define. I mean, for us, it's basically a third of our life. Um,
it's time. I mean,
and
that's what it is. It's
it,
time. You've
and
sunk a lot of time.
but one of the things that really stood out to me that was just like I was not expecting this is, or I guess a couple things. One is that I knew that it was a race between me and my employer. Like I was aware that it was either I was going to quit or they were going to let me go for a couple reasons. One is that my passion was long gone, and so I wasn't that
Mm,
exceptional of an employee at that point. I knew my stuff, and I knew exactly what to do, but I knew exactly how much I had to do to without exerting myself in any sort of way, and then getting through my day because I didn't care about it. And so in that regard, no part of me disagrees with their decision, but we had kind of gotten to this point where it's like I had set a date of this is when I will be leaving, and I was trying to work to it, and I was about 6 weeks away because my 5 year stream anniversary is coming up, and I wanted to announce on that day that
oh
I
man,
had put in my 2 weeks notice 2 weeks before, and the day before, like that was my grand plan, and I just felt that was a nice symmetry or whatever, and they screwed it all up, and that's fine. But only 6 weeks or so from
yeah.
where I had planned to quit anyway to here. So I had lined things up and was, like on the financial side, it's difficult, of course, but I have this as an out, and I had, had been lining things up. And yet what really struck me is just how much I still like it was devastating in many ways. Like this is someplace I had lost interest in, didn't want to be, didn't look forward to going to, and was actively working to leave. And when they were like, just right there at the tail end, just kind of, okay, here, let us give you that final nudge. It was like, you son of a bitch! What? What?
Yeah, right.
Excuse me? Like, hello? And like, I went through. I don't know. It was literal stages of grief, but
Yeah.
I went through this. It was hard to accept. That I was angry at them for various reasons. I didn't really bargain with anyone. I just kind of like, okay, well, this is how it is. But like it's a hard thing, and it was just amazing to me how I was probably in one of the most prepped positions possible, and to alliterate heavily. But I was
Hmm.
in about as good of a position as you could be, and it was still so tough. So for all of you people who are dealing with it, just my heart goes out to you. And again, keeping in mind, I saw someone mention earlier in chat that advice from the high school teacher, but they'd said you've overcome 100% of the problems you've encountered so far, which is kind of a cool way to look at it. But yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get through this, and there will be another side. But man, it's amazing how hard that hits you, and how, again, maybe it's just American culture, but being in the middle of American culture, it's kind of been part of my life. It was much heavier than I expected it to be.
Well, I mean, we also like control. Like, there is a beauty to the idea that you had this thing set up, right? Like,
Hmm.
this was gonna go in this way, and it built this beautiful set of expectations for yourself and all these things, and then all of the autonomy that was wrapped up in that got stripped. And I think, I mean, that happened for so many people through this and is continuing to happen for people. And as I've talked about before, the human brain does not do well with having our experience not align with our expectations for
Right.
things. And there is this, like, it is devastating. If for no other reason, it's that FU thing is because of, like, where was my I had all my autonomy and you took all of it away from me, and that is bullshit. And it's okay to be upset about it. It really is. I think there's this cool balance I think that a lot of people can reach. And having talked with you a bit, I think you seem to fall in that, which is people have to be really careful not to overly contextualize the things that happen to them as a way to remove the emotion of that, because I think sometimes people will go like, well, it was a pandemic and it was this, and some people have it worse, and thus I shouldn't be upset about it at all. And I think that's also not great because it moves people away from really paying attention to what's going on for them. So I think it's a healthy dose of both, of this is in context. Things will get better. I will overcome, but also it totally sucks. And I can hold space for that too, because you don't want to deny both. You or one or the other. You sort of want to hold them both at once. Sometimes they don't jive very well, but I just think that's so important. So
Someone from chat asked, "What if to counter anxiety, you just pull away from people? How will that affect?" Which is an interesting one. I don't know that
oh
I'd know how to answer that because, like, pulling away, like that's to me a depressive behavior, but it's a depressive behaviors usually aren't a response to an active like that one hits on both anxiety and depression. And as soon as you get into the
yeah.
anxiety level, I'm like, I don't know what I'm talking about anymore.
So it's actually a really great question because it brings back, I mean, I'm going to go bounce back to that theory. So I talked about triangulation as being one method of trying to stabilize anxiety or mitigate it. Well, cutoff is another dynamic that gets talked about. Cutoff in the form of separation, which basically means I'm going to put a huge amount of space between me and you, because I believe that if I do that, it's going to diminish the anxiety I experience in the dyad. So if we got in a fight and then I said, you know what, dude, I'm out. We're not talking anymore. I'm going to end the stream. I'm going to end my role in the stream, and then I'm out. That is a form of cutoff, and that actually does not mitigate anxiety. It just stabilizes it. So what's going to happen is the next time we engage, if we do, that anxiety is still going to be there, or that effect is still going to be there. And a lot of people don't realize that when they go to initiate cutoffs, they think they can just kind of return and be fine, but it holds it in place. It also holds it in place mentally. So your last mental image of that person or that system is what you cut off from. So it becomes kind of what you mentally operate off of in the absence of that person being around. So it stabilizes the anxiety. And I don't mean stabilize in the good way. I mean stabilizes and holds it in place. And so the theorist Bowen said, don't cut anybody off. That has since been kind of like reworked, of like, you can cut people off, but it's to effectively cut a person off takes way more cognitive and emotional effort than people realize. It is not as easy as just ending it. So if you ever want to cut somebody off, I highly recommend talking to a therapist about it or getting some real good support about it, because it's not as easy as you think. And the last thing I'll say about that is, this is rarely talked about, is death is also a cutoff. So a lot of times when people experience a significant amount of grief in the context of death as it relates to anxiety, it is because the death stabilized whatever anxiety loose ends were not tied up before the person died, which can also really impact a person's grieving process. So that's why, another example of like why I cut out, like when people get a chance to mourn the death of a person before they die, they generally will handle grief a lot more effectively than if it's a sudden thing, because it holds everything in place all of a sudden. So cutoff is not any better than like triangulation or enmeshment. It's a dynamic that generally doesn't do people as well as or doesn't help people as much as they think they're going to.
So more, I kind of hear that, at least with on the death side, is that's the what people would say is the lack of closure, right? You know, you had a
Hmm.
fight and then they die, and then you have all this extra anxiety
Yep.
or emotion because the fight is unresolved and now it can't ever be resolved, and so it's just like it's stuck there. It's almost it what's it That's interesting, but that's almost like a phantom limb pain kind of thing.
Mhm.
I wonder
Oh, that's a good metaphor.
that's interesting. I
Yep.
like that just lined up and I was like, but um God, it's cutting people off is very traumatic, but like I see people pull away a lot and then they go through episodes where it's like they pull away and then they come back and they pull away and they come back. And I actually have people that I almost have to just account for that, allow for it, right? Because that's
Mhm.
they'll be I'll talk to them and they'll be mad at me, they'll be cold, they'll be, pushing me away, and then it's like I just kind of, all right, this is where you're at. And then given a day, given a few, they'll kind of come back. And I don't know why I was like that. To me, that's more depressive episodes, isn't it? Or is that, is there a number of different things there where you'd have to kind of more assess to figure out why they're triggering that?
Yeah, I mean, a depressive episode could certainly be an explanation for why a person's doing that, because I do like when people do go through depressive episodes or through depression, they tend to isolate
Hmm.
themselves. So that is certainly a possible explanation. I tend to look at it, I mean, I tend to look at it from more of an attachment perspective in terms of like people basically operating from their attachment style, which I can go into if you want, but basically like we look at it as a regulation of closeness and distance. And some people feel more uncomfortable with closeness, and some people feel more uncomfortable with distance. And so they will regulate as such. So people who sort of snap back and forth, as a therapist, I'm looking at them saying, okay, so one of those spaces, the closest in distance, is creating a significant amount of anxiety for you, and you are compensating for that by doing X thing until some other factor then contributes to you making the choice to reach back out. And there's a lot of explanations for that. But yes, a depressive episode could certainly be that. Anxiety can be an explanation of that. Sometimes it's healthy to do that. Like we do need to have space in our
Sure.
relationships. But I think if it becomes this real significant pattern and you can see these nodal instances of like an uptick in anxiety or distress that leads to that, that's where, as a therapist, I'm going to poke in on that and really try to get a feel for the pattern there and why that's happening, so that not so that the person can necessarily stop doing it, but so that the person can see doing that as an informed choice as
Right.
opposed to something they're just reacting to.
That's interesting. It's been and I'm thinking of a couple different individuals that I specifically work with and or talk to. Work with sounds professional, but I mean, just try and help. But
Mhm.
it's a little frustrating just because I don't know how to help them other than to just remain their friend even through that. Like I know that they don't want the friendship to actually end. They're just it's whatever's affecting them, making them push back, and that in a few days they'll reconnect and apologize and stuff like that. But I just that's one of those ones that it's like that I hit those points where I'm like, God, I wish that this is where I wish I had that training where I wish I could. I want counselor slash psychiatrist. I mean, I don't know which one's not psychology. That's medicine, right? Or is it psychiatry?
Psychiatry is medicine.
Okay, so psychology, like I want that training. It's just I don't want to have to deal with all the extra stuff around it, whereas I have to actually make that my job, right? Like I just want to know all about it. Is that fine? Can I just go audit the
Yeah,
classes, not pay for any of it, and
dude, I gotta tell you, in a lot of ways, and I really mean this, I actually envy sometimes the position that you're in as it relates to psychology, because there's this thing that happens where the more credentials you get, the farther away you get from being able to use it in personal context. Like, there are so
Hmm.
many times where I wish I could employ what I know, but I can't
Oh,
because I ethically am not able to.
right.
So this is where you get this really interesting thing that happens, where you are not part of this group, because I think you actually are mindful and care about what you're saying and you say good things.
I try.
But there are people who can just dole out mental health advice and say whatever they want, and there's no accountability for it because they're not held accountable by any type of ethical code or any license or anything like that. So sometimes people get frustrated with me when they ask questions or whatever, and I don't answer them, or I say I can't answer them. And it's not because I don't want to. There are many times where people reach out to me and I would love to answer it because I could see it. Like I could be like, I know exactly what's going on, but because I'm a therapist and because I have an ethical code and a license, I can't do that. So I envy sometimes the position you're in to be able to dole it out and to say things and to go there with people because I have lost my ability to do that in my personal life. And that's a really odd experience to have, to think about mental health stuff all the time, but not necessarily be able to like operationalize it other than in general terms.
Right.
So,
That's interesting. I mean, it makes me think like there's several friendships or and I mean they develop into friendships and stuff, but people come and ask advice or I get talking with them through the community, through the streams and stuff, and it just you made me kind of realize like there's many of those you wouldn't be allowed to do. You'd have to shut down like almost immediately. Where I'm like, tell me what's going on. I don't know,
mhm.
like, and I mean, obviously, I try and make it clear I'm not a therapist. I'm just here as a friend. But I think that's what you're getting at, right? It's just that I mean, again, these are people that I talk to that I care about and have just gotten to know through the community because they've said I'm having a hard time and I'm like, tell me about it. What's going on? Well,
Yeah.
here's what I think and do with it what you will. I'm not claiming coming to you as a doctor, but because you are a doctor, you don't have that luxury.
Well, because most people will come to me and ask me those types of things because they know I'm a
Right.
therapist. So if the whole context of the conversation is because you know that I'm a therapist and that's why you're opening up to me about whatever it is you're opening up to me about, my hands are tied. But that, again, that's where it's like it's on me to identify those things. But I do my best to give general info and to
Right.
like, yeah. But yeah, that's I think what you're talking about is something that so many people, not even just streamers, but like people deal with, right? Is like people come with these very complex things. And it's like, how do I handle that? How do I help? And I say a lot, and I say this to anybody who's watching this right now. Honestly, most of the time, the very best thing you can do is just listen. Like, literally, just don't even think about how you're going to respond. Just put all of your effort into hearing what the person has to say and validating whatever emotional experience they're having. That goes so far for people. But my God, Zine, it is one of the hardest things I can ever get people to do when I am doing therapy. Like, it is the gateway to problem solving, it's the gateway to a better relationship, to health, like so many things. But people just struggle so hard with doing that because so many of us feel like we have to respond, like we have to fix, like we have to help, like we have to understand, like all these things. People will talk if you just listen. And I would guess that the reason so many people are comfortable talking to you is because you do that, because you are curious and you listen. And it goes so far. So anybody watching this, seriously, if you ever ask yourself, how do I help this person? Unless it's an emergency, just listen. Like, just listen to what they have to say.
And I thanks. I mean, I actually catch myself doing that, so I appreciate you saying that I am good about that. I really do try and listen, and particularly like I am very comfortable in writing and so if you can write at me, then I can really craft a message and kind of send it back, and hopefully I can change the tone to match to where I understand, or at least hopefully, ideally, understand, here's how much I can say without them getting defensive. Here's all those lines and stuff, which is kind of strange. People tell me, you can't, this is segueing, but people tell me you can't tell tone through text, like, oh man, people type and that's why the joke got lost is it's just, and it's like, no, it's just a bad joke. Like I pick up, I can read text
Yeah.
in your voice just fine. Like I hear inflections and stuff.
Yep.
So, although I will say that there is like I couldn't give you an actual percentage, but to make up a number, like probably 1 in 25, 50 or something, where they talk, or they type monotone. And that is the most aggravating thing for me because if you want to ever see me have that like be neurotic, like how are you doing, checking in, affirmate, like are you okay, it's because you end every sentence without, or you start every sentence without punctuating, you end every sentence with an ellipsis, and so I'm just like, are you okay, talk to
Oh
me, I
man.
don't understand.
Oh man.
I had my ex brother-in-law literally would finish every sentence with an ellipsis, and so it
Oh.
was like, "Do you want to go to the movies this week? We could. Dot
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 dot.
dot.
What do you
Dot
want
dot
to?
dot.
Sure. Dot dot dot. Well, do you
Oh
or
my
don't you?
god.
Like,
Oh my
fuck. I
god.
can't. Oh my god. But that's
Dude.
nothing to do with mental health other than losing mine, but
When I
being
was in college, that's how I used to type to people. So my laughter is because it drives me crazy now, but also because that was me back in the day. Anytime I wanted to convey a pause, I would use an ellipses, and I realized it was a terrible idea.
So,
Way too late.
Kara just did the multiple lines for every sentence, but that actually is a tone. It's just the hyper excited. That's they have. There's so there's two things, two reasons that people do that. One is that they want to try and pace their cadence in their words so that you read the lines, and I do that sometimes for dramatic effect.
Mhm.
But they're trying to do that. But mostly it's because they're so excited about what they want to say, or they're so worried that the conversation is going to leave without them that it's like they're trying to get it in. So it's, that almost neurotic, like
Yep.
interjection, basically. So I actually pick up tone and can understand a little bit where they're coming from with that. But the ellipsis kills me unless it's used correctly. Guys, I'm just saying, just take it. Stop it, Kara. But um, she's freaking Kara, man. I tell you.
I
I
love it.
actually, it's interesting, Commander Victoria. I discourage the use of that because it is based of re because it's based off the sounds that an autistic person makes when they're frustrated, and like we on our channel it kind of, and I'm not saying this like to taking you to task, but just more conversationally of we trying to not allow that because it is slightly derogatory of people who are in that frustrated space, and if you look at kind of what's the etymology? What's I can't remember the root of the word or the source of the phrase. I guess it's not really a great place. So it was just caught me by surprise that you were using it, but maybe you just don't know. Like again, I'm not trying to call you out like wow or anything, but I don't know if that's commonly seen or if it's just a quirk here or not. But we try and avoid it.
It's good. It's one of those um, that it's so interesting because it's one of those things that like has been, I think, adopted so many times
Yeah, it could
over.
have been that it's lost. It's been watered down to the point where it's not really.
Well,
Or
but it's also like I'm agreeing with you in a lot of ways. Like it's sort of a weird thing. Like there's a lot of things that happen. I think we do this a lot with I'll kind of make a broader point here is of like we do this a lot with mental health stuff where when a person says like, "Oh, I like when my desk is clean and I'm so OCD about it." Or
triggered
if
is
a
another
person
one.
says, like, "Oh man, like I have such PTSD from like that one time that this happened or whatever." Like there is we throw some of these very loaded terms around um without real, and I don't blame, I don't see people doing it like in some manipulative way or like
No,
some bad thing, but like we throw some of these things around really casually, and it's like you hear it with physical stuff too, and like that always, like when people are like, "Oh man, yeah, like that community is like literal cancer, like that can't that they're that's AIDS." Like I just, it's so weird when we use some of these like terms like this to, because I get it, it's like a way of hyperbolizing things, but
hmm
it's just, I don't know, it's making a point about that. Like I really encourage people to be mindful about using that type of language. Like I get why people do it, but especially the OCD thing. As somebody who works with OCD a lot, like I, OCD is utterly debilitating. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's not like I'm so quirky because I like my plants arranged a certain way. It is literally a mental hellhole to
there
be
is.
in.
I would say. I mean, I agree. Not to. I mean, I listened. I understood. Just so you know, but. I read someone saying even mild stuff like that's lame, and I think that there's a point where you have to accept the conversation and vocabulary and language is going to happen. So it's like for me, it's the I try and be better. I try and educate, but on thoughts. But at the same time, like I try not to take offense, like particularly because it doesn't necessarily apply to me. But also, like I would encourage everyone, don't. The language does evolve and co-opt words and bring things in, and so again, try and be better for yourself, but try not to be so hypersensitive that you're offended on others'
Oh yeah.
behalfs because you hear that like again, that there's a line there where you have to. I mean, just make a personal decision, but it's more about for me just understanding it and educating and going, okay, then I can remove that from my vocabulary, but not I'm upset at you because you used it.
Yeah.
Um, Powerful and meaningless at the same time. I agree. You're talking about listening and the best thing that it can do to kind of rewind just a little bit though. I one of the few things which is that I went through is my old job was based out of the Franklin Covey headquarters. It was, their business park in Utah, and that's the seven highly habits of highly effective people.
Yeah.
And so we all got sent through, or at least all the managers got sent through the training there, which honestly it wasn't. It was different, but it wasn't terrible training. Um, and they talked about two things that I kind of carry with me. One of which is the circle of influence, circle of concern. We brief. I think we talked on that last time of
Hmm.
trying to recognize these are the things, the broader things, the number of concerns you have in life, and then you have the smaller circle within that of things you can actually influence. And the closer you can get to having those be aligned, the less insecure and anxious you're going to be because you're only worrying about things you can actively influence.
Hmm.
And but the other thing one of the things they talk about is listen to understand, not to respond, which is
Yep.
basically restated what you were saying of, you know, we hear things and it's someone will be telling a story and I'm very vulnerable or guilty of this myself, but someone will be telling a story and it'll trigger a thought, a response, an idea, something as you were listening to them to where you start formulating how to add on your thought, your response, your idea, etc., to the conversation or in response. And during that entire time that you're figuring out the right words to say, the right way to say it, the right way, how to make it funny, how to make it
Yep.
interact, you've stopped listening to the other person. And that's to kind of expand just on that further, is you get into your own head of how am I going to respond to this? And again, it's very, very easy to do. I've done it several times just in us as you've kind of been talking. I'm like, okay, I need to remember that this is the next thing, and that this comment was funny, so let's bring that up. I mean, I'm part of that's just trying to run the show and everything like that, but really being mindful and particularly in a one-on-one conversation, as you said, that's just one of the most helpful things. Is people just want to be understood. They want to know that others care and that there's what they're feeling is, as you said, valid. You go out of your way to a point that is, for me, I tease you about it and it's slightly comical, but in terms of validating everything you hear to make sure that people understand, I hear you, I understand that affected you, and I don't disagree
Hmm.
that it should have affected you. And like, again, it's to a point where it stands out to me because I recognize that sequence of events. But that really, as you've been saying, that's just something that for people who are hurting or people who are lost, that's what they're looking for, is just, please just listen to me for a minute. You don't need to tell me how to fix my problems, or maybe at the end they can, you can have that conversation of what would you like me to do about it, but they're
Hmm.
just looking to be understood. And that's helped me a lot as I've worked with people as well. And sometimes it'll be when they'll start and they'll be like, I have a question or I have this problem. What do you think? And I might ask a question like expand on that, but I'll actually preface it with, are you looking for me to just validate you, to just tell you that you're right, that you should be upset? Are you looking for me to help you with this? Like, and it's a very awkward part of the conversation, but you get better at it as you kind of get used to it. But I really do go into certain things like, wait, what are you looking for? Are you just looking for that?
Hmm.
Yeah, that dude sucks. I can't believe they did that, which is something that a lot of people do. And,
Yep.
it isn't great in and of itself. There are times when it has its place, but really, you get just a feedback loop of, let me tell you my bitch story. Yeah. And let me tell you my bitch story. Yeah. And then you just work yourselves up into a tizzy
Yeah.
over nothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you are talking, I guess, to kind of put a point on this, if you are talking to someone, if you are dealing with someone who you know and love that is struggling, and you're trying to be that best person or that most present person for them, then just listen to them. Try and understand what they're saying and what they're feeling. Don't worry about your reply. Worry about what they're saying. It really is a very different way to listen. I think
Hmm.
it's also called active listening, or maybe that's slightly different, but kind of that same idea of, you are trying to understand them. You are not trying to craft your perfect pithy response, you know? So,
Absolutely. I mean, if anybody's wondering, like, how do I do this? Like, if you're sitting here going, like, how do I be an active listener? I'm going to tell a quick story about when I worked on the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which was also a crisis center. I used to do overnight shifts. But when we did training, it was this long 39-hour, or no, it was more than that. It was very long training. I forget how many hours it was at this point, but it was multiple weeks and multiple hours. And it was sequenced in the same way that you would sequence a phone call when somebody would call in. So you're sitting at the crisis center, somebody calls in, you have no idea what that person's about to say, but you know that they're in crisis and you know that they're having a hard time. So you answer, you say hello, and you start talking to the person. And the very first thing that we're taught, it was the first training, was empathy. How to show empathy to somebody. Empathy being using some idea of your own personal experience, but paying more attention to what the other person's experiencing and reflecting that emotional experience back to that person. We have this really awful tendency to do that by telling stories about a similar experience we had. And we often do that as an attempt to empathize with people, but it takes away from what's going on for the person. Instead, it's I hear a hint of frustration. So I might say something like, well, it sounds like you're frustrated about that. And you don't use minimizers or maximizers. People tend to go, you sound a little frustrated, or you sound very frustrated. It's, you sound frustrated about that. And if you're right, people will go, yes, I am. I'm frustrated, and they'll keep going. If you're wrong, people go, no, no, I'm not so much frustrated, more as I'm sad. You like literally win no matter what you do when you make an attempt to empathize with a person. But as you do that through a conversation, you reflect, like, it sounds like, so just to use an example of saying, like, it sounds like you lost your job, that it sent you into, there was a lot of emotions that went on. It sounds like that was really tough for you, and it really had you scrambled. I used the maximizer there, but that would be an example of empathy, right? So, like, I haven't actually said anything to add to the conversation other than responding to what you've said. So that's empathy.
Mhm.
The next step was, after we got people to empathize and practice that, you move to values, which is where you then try to get a sense of what core values are driving that person's emotional experience. So asking questions about, so what is it that made you frustrated about it? Tell me more about how sad you are about that, and why that's the case and what's going on for you, and trying to get at that. And then the third step was problem solving. So you would literally never even go into problem solving until you first had empathized and you had some idea of what values were driving that. You would do that really in any call except for like an utter emergency. And it changed the way that I viewed listening, because it made it so that when people called the center, they would open up to a complete stranger because I was doing those things. So imagine how powerful it would be if you're in a relationship where you know the person and have a deep connection with that person, and they do that.
Right.
People will usually tell you if they want you to help them solve their problems, but they got to know that you understand where they're coming from before they're even going to listen to what you have to say about how to fix their problems. So it's a very long, drawn out way, but I think sometimes I get that question of, like, how do I do that?
Mhm.
And it really is like as simple as reflecting what you're hearing and showing through verbal and nonverbal nods that you understand what that person's saying to the
Right.
best of your ability.
Do you guys? I've heard you, at least as far as I understand. If you'll excuse the term, misuse. But do you guys ever cover sympathy versus empathy and the real differences
Yes.
between them?
Yes.
I mean, to me, like, and maybe I have it wrong. As far as I'm aware, and have understood it, empathy is being able to directly relate to someone's experiences, where sympathy is being able to, like, you don't have that direct relation, but you're still feeling for them even though you can't directly relate. So one is like, I have empathy if or you would have empathy for me if you've also lost your job and you can relate, whereas you would have sympathy for me if you recognize that you haven't lost your job or haven't ever been through that, but you see how that would be affecting me. Is that am I misinterpreting that? And so but I've always thought of it as just empathetic is more of a direct, or empathy. When I'm feeling empathy for someone, it's I can directly relate to that, versus sympathy,
Hmm.
whereas I can assume or interpret how you're feeling, even though I haven't dealt with it myself. Is
I
that
would say that's pretty good. I would add a very, like, important piece of this though,
okay?
which is that sympathy often comes with it a value judgment. So, um,
Hmm.
empathy is kind of like you draw from your own experiences, but you're also paying attention to cues from the other person and kind of trying to synthesize those things so you can understand them. Whereas sympathy is usually a little bit more of, I'm going to place some degree of judgment using a form of inductive reasoning for my own life to try to get a feel for what it is, like it's a little bit less collaborative.
Right.
And it's a little bit less drawing from your own experience. So like, pity is often a word that's used synonymously with sympathy. And I think pity is kind of the extreme version of that, where a person's really just, placing that like value judgment of like, oh, like you should be so devastated by this. And like, I feel so bad for you in my high and mighty throne or whatever. But sympathy, I think, usually has this like evaluative component to it that goes unsaid. Whereas empathy is really this like, hey, we're on an equal plane here, and I'm really just trying to understand what's going on for you. So like if you say to somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, so and so in my life died," and you go like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." That's sympathy, because you're basically making some judgment that that must be sad or bad in some way, and so I'm going to convey this to you, as opposed to so and so died. You go, "Wow, like how are you doing?" Is like that, that did it catch you off guard? Like right? It starts with a question. And then a person starts talking about it and you go, wow, like it sounds like you're confused about why this happened this way. It sounds really difficult for you. And you go, yes. Right. Like I'm sort of drawing upon what my idea of a difficult situation would be using context clues, where
Right.
sympathy is just an immediate like response.
Interesting. So empathy is more just a bit about building that feeling and that response based off of what the other person is feeling, where sympathy is more you assuming how they've got to be feeling in that
Mm-hmm.
moment, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
One's more of an assumption and as you said, a judgment. And also, apparently, offended all the empaths in the chat who were like, "Excuse me, sir."
Yeah.
But all right. Well, I mean,
Sympathy gets a bad rap, but it's not bad. It's just it
I mean,
doesn't usually cut as deep as empathy does.
right, and I think that you're still. I typically sympathy isn't. In fact, I mean, sympathy generally isn't going to be coming from a place of negative intention. It just might not be quite as directly applicable because you're presuming how it is instead of exploring how the other person where they genuinely are.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
So, okay, well, we, now that we've taught everybody how to work at a crisis center and listen to people, um, you want to try and roll through some comments or?
Yeah. No, we can go wherever. I'm just enjoying the conversation.
I'm
I
enjoying it
also
too. Like I was looking at, it, I was like, man, we're like 70 minutes in. You're gonna be like, oh, I'm at the wall here in 10
no.
minutes because you can't stay up later than 10 o'clock your time or something like that. But without
Somebody hasn't been watching my streams lately, guys. I was up till
oh,
3 a.m. last
were
night, my
you?
friend.
I
Oh
was
yeah, I
I
got
was
I
I
got
was in your stream like 4 days ago, and you 12:30 on the dot, and you're like, guys, I can feel it coming. I can't even go on. Like it's just
uh I know.
uh
You must have. Well, I forget what day that was. No, I got energy tonight. I'm good to
nice,
go.
nice, good to go.
So
All right,
yeah,
I'm
no wall
this
early
is
this
this is
night.
I mean the colors are lost, but these are Red Bulls, so I'm good to
Oh
go.
my God, careful! They give you wings.
I mean but in strange places, not where you'd expect them. It's very weird. Let's not
Um,
talk about it. Um, I mean, I'm just saying I've got lift, but not lift off. That's different. But bro, SpaceX sending people to the moon or to the moon to the orbit here in like 3 days is gonna be awesome. Coming back, reel it in. Uh, you can't handle me. I love it. I'm just all over
Seems
the
a funny
place.
guy, man. I mean, you're a funny dude. I gotta say.
How how do you regain control when you end up in a state of extreme emotion? I find it hard to take myself out of the heat of the moment. That's an excellent one.
Is.
I mean, that's probably a coping mechanism I'd leave for you more than me trying to jump in on that.
I'm gonna use a term that gets thrown around a lot, but then I'll explain what it is. Grounding is a very important thing, which is basically where you have to draw your attention to the present moment and things that you can tangibly experience. It doesn't have to be touch. Sometimes people think it means you have to be touching something. But if you pay attention to like your feet on the floor, your ass in the chair, your the cool air on your hands and face, or whatever, that can be helpful. Sometimes it's like staring at a clock or staring at a certain point of reference. I used to have a poster in my bedroom it was a Pink Floyd poster, and it was, as you can imagine, pretty crazy and all over the place. And if I was ever really
Well,
angry, I used to
depends on which
count.
album.
It was like an amalgam of all of them. It was
Oh,
like this triangle, and it had these hexagons in it. It was trippy. But I used to like focus on that if I was ever really distressed, because it would help me, and I'd try to find something new every time. That was really helpful. Breathing is super important. When we have an explosive emotional outburst, what happens is your sympathetic nervous system fires. And it's where you get all those like the tinglies and the jolts, and your endocrine system sends a whole bunch of hormones out, and you get adrenaline rush, all these sorts of things. So your goal in that moment is to engage your parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to calm you down. And breath is a very common and easy way to do that, which is the in through the nose, hold out through the mouth thing. But grounding also engages that. And then you got to give it like 15 minutes for your endocrine system to flush all the crap out of your body, because sometimes people think they have to just snap back, and it's not going to work. Hormones take a longer time to move through your body than a nervous system response. And so you'll have this residual feeling afterwards. But it's all about grounding, having building a better relationship with your emotional experience, so that if you're angry or anxious or whatever, you can acknowledge that as just an emotion without any value judgment on it, because that's what we tend to do, and that compounds it. Having a good relationship with your emotions, that takes long work, but then grounding, focusing on the here and now, selective focus on various things that are interesting to you or will bring you back into the present, and going from there. That's the best I can say without having done a full assessment
Right.
on a person and their response to an emotional outburst.
Right. And I mean, it's all better stated of the things that I would cover too. So I don't really have anything I'd add to that. Just again, like you said, or for me, extreme emotional response. You narrow the view until you can handle what you're dealing with. If you're out of control, that's which again,
Mm-hmm.
a much smaller response. How do you know when to go to a therapist versus a psychologist?
Well, if you want to get into like the technical terms of it, a psychologist is just somebody who studies psychology. They don't necessarily have to be a therapist, but psychologists can be therapists. I think what that question is probably asking is, how do I know what type of therapist to go see?
Hmm.
Which is dependent first and foremost on how many people you intend to have in the room, and also what your objective is. A psychiatrist is the only person who can prescribe medication. So if you're thinking the medication route, or you think you have some very severe psychosis, you're going to want to go the psychiatrist route. If you want to be assessed for something like autism or ADHD or something like that, you're going to want to go to a clinical psychologist or a psychological counselor. Usually, the LPC is the acronym or the initialism that's used for that. Um, if you have multiple people that you're going to have in the room, then a marriage and family therapist is the route you're going to want to go, because they're trained to think systemically in the way we were talking about a little while ago. If you're needing like extra resources and care from the community and some like uh, intervention in like schools and just a lot of coordination, a social worker is going to be the route that you're going to want to go. Like a clinical social worker is going to be more helpful to you. But um, that would be the best answer I have in terms of like how to figure out what type of person to go see. There's also like licensed mental health counselors. They're also okay to see. Just make sure, for the love of God, you see somebody who has an actual credential. Do
Should they go
not,
to a life coach?
I knew you were going to ask me that. Do not go see a life coach. Life coach is not a protected term. There is no code of ethics. This is going to soapbox me, so I'm going to hold myself back from going too crazy on this. But uh, it's not a protected term. I'm sure there are okay life coaches out there, but you take a massive risk as a client if you go to see a life coach, because there's a good chance that person has no training and is only using what they know or what they've read in pop psychology. And I've seen too many people in my life that have been harmed by life coaches or have gotten horrifically terrible advice from life coaches, all who were well meaning, but who have no code of ethics. So if you have a life coach do something really crappy and tell you something shitty and you go do it and it causes harm, there is no accountability there. They are not held accountable to anything. So please, if you have them, there are affordable counseling options out there. And if you ever need help finding somebody, come find me, because I try to help people find therapists in their area that they can afford or whatnot. Like, there are ways to get affordable therapy. Do not see a life coach. That's all I'm going to say about life coaches, because I will soapbox so hard on that, unless you want me to
Well,
soapbox.
no,
But oh my
I
god,
don't, I know. I just poke the bear. But it is interesting, like, and we've kind of talked about this, and you've, I don't know, reaffirmed or whatever. But every time you describe that, like, that is uncomfortably close to some of the realm that I kind of live in, and so I'm like, and I hope that I'm not hitting in that area, but I'm not
you aren't.
credentialed. What's
I
that?
just you aren't. You are not even close. Like, I gotta tell you, the reason that's so problematic is because it's because people don't know. There's so many people who will see like certified life coach or some bullshit like that, and they think it's legitimate. So they will go see that person and pay them money because they think that that person is basically a therapist, and they aren't. By definition, they aren't.
Presenting themselves as
You
credentialed in some way.
Correct. You are a streamer, and people know that, and they know that, like, or you're a friend, or you're a family member, or whatever. So, like, it's completely different. You are not misleading an entire group of people into talking to you because of some credential you have that they don't, and understandably don't know is problematic.
Okay.
So, I just want to make sure you know what you're
And
doing
like,
is
but
not
you
even
you can
remotely
understand,
close.
like, I mean, where
I
you try
can.
and listen and stuff, like you go into that, I'm like, oh shit balls. But
Yeah.
you're right. I mean, I do try and be very clear. I'm not a doctor. Please don't listen to anything I say. Basically, this is if this is like really quick, then I wouldn't mind. I'm kind of curious about the answer, but if it's
Mhm.
involved, then I think it's very specific. So we probably spend time elsewhere. Can you explain the difference between OCD and OCPD? This person's therapist said that they have
Oh,
OCPD versus OCD, and if that's like big and involved, and I don't think it involves many people, so I'd probably rather spend our time on more
yeah.
generalized concepts than something like minute and specific.
Oof. Yeah. So what I would say just about that, first of all, if to whoever asked that, if your therapist diagnosed you with OCPD, basically it's obsessive compulsive personality disorder as opposed to just obsessive compulsive disorder. Um, there is the main. I'll give the one difference, which is that like you kind of is the common thing to think of, which is that person will often try to impose that their compulsions on the external environment as opposed to kind of holding them internally. Like they basically like will make it other people's problems. I don't mean that in the way that it sounds. Like it's got that it's extra relational component that becomes a very consistent thing that happens in the relationships. The thing I would say though, just to kind of wrap that one up, is to the person who asked that, if you are confused at all about that diagnosis and are like, what does this mean and how is this different or whatever, ask your therapist. Because if they did an assessment and know the difference enough to have made that diagnosis, then I would hope to God that they were doing that. I'm sure they were in an informed way. Ask them. They had damn well better be able to answer that question. If your therapist can't answer why they diagnosed you with whatever they diagnosed you with, that is a massive red flag, like huge red flag. So ask your therapist.
I couldn't have even told you the difference between the two. So, slight differences between the caliber of your hosts, guys. What's that? So, is there a healthy way to deal with people that gaslight you when they say it's all in your head? Maybe a way to redirect the conversation without it sounding like you're attacking them?
Gaslighting is manipulation. And I want to say really quickly that there is kind of, because gaslighting has become more and more in like the collective lexicon at this point.
Buzzword almost. It's a little
It
diluted.
is. People throw that out there sometimes as like a way to stop people from saying however they're experiencing a certain thing. And I really want to just throw that out there. Not saying that's what this
Hmm.
person is implying, but just that gets overused right now. Um, but if you are actually being gaslit, then really the only antidote to gaslighting is boundaries. Because that person is basically, if that person is gaslighting, they are trying to manipulate you. They're trying to, for anybody who doesn't know what gaslighting is, it's an attempt by a person to make another person go against their own core values, sensibilities, and experience of what's going on in lieu of whatever agenda that person has. So it's basically trying to get you to question your own perception of the world, to the point where sometimes people can be gaslit to the point where they will be told that what they are seeing with their own eyes is not real. And that gets all 1984 real fast. But but if you are being gaslit and you recognize it as gaslighting, protect yourself by setting boundaries, removing yourself from the situation as best you can, calling it out, getting support from others to affirm what's going on for you, so that you can recognize that it's probably that person exerting a more influence and manipulating as opposed to it being what's going on for you. Anytime you're being asked to question your eyes and ears, be careful.
And I would say and add to that I feel. Let's see. I feel I'm giving you a thought. Um, But the
I
gaslighting,
I love it, Zine.
the origination of the term, guys, is I don't remember the movie or book, but it was an abusive husband who it was back when the lights in the house were gas lamps instead of actual electrical lighting, and he was adjusting them slightly down slowly over time, and every time his wife would mention it, he'd say no, they're fine, uh, like over a duration of time caused her to question her own self and her own sanity because she thought this was happening, but he wasn't reacting, and she started believing him. And it gives a very tremendous sense of control to the person who's doing it, and is very dehumanizing, or it makes you feel to use the word just crazy. It makes you question who you are and what your perception is, as you said. And we are seeing that in interestingly, I'm seeing the word thrown around at times, and it's not just it's when someone does it to abuse, manipulate, control. To They have an agenda, and they're specifically setting the scene differently than the way that it is, so that you question yourself and you believe them more, so that you become more dependent. It's not about I remember it differently and them disagreeing with you. I see that where, or it's not even about
Right.
like I saw someone who went through a breakup, and they accused the other person of gaslighting them because they always told them that they looked good in these things, or tried to set up a perception of self-worth, or like make you feel better about the way things are, rather than just like, nope, that shit, that looks horrible on you. And it's like that's not what it is. Gaslighting is about tearing another person's self-worth down, and through a specific mechanism, to the point where you are completely dependent on them. My sister had an abusive marriage at one point, and it's interesting. She's a very strong woman, but
Mhm.
as she went through that cycle until she kind of hit bottom and clawed herself back out, she became progressively smaller and smaller as a person, as an individual, as a personality, and her husband grew and grew as he controlled her and as he dominated her in so many different psychological ways. So be careful with the term, for one, and not to say that it doesn't
Mhm.
exist, but it's
Mhm.
one that is very, very overused, and people, like, just it's a specific thing, and it's a very horrific thing. It is truly tearing someone apart. So be careful with that. But as you said, that's kind of the idea. And what's interesting is we are seeing low levels of that, even, like, not to get into politics too much, but we're actively, there the whole idea of there's facts and there's alternate facts, and there's things like, the don't believe what you're seeing, believe what I'm telling you. Like, that is
Right.
a attitude that's in our political system right now. And as you said, it gets into the 1984 stuff. And I'm not trying to take a position on any politics or anything like that, but you can actually see like grander levels that are that less personalized space, but just the depend on me, believe what I say, regardless of what you yourself are interpreting or believing, because I'm right and you are wrong. And the way that you know this is, over the course of time, I've shown you all these different things that you thought you knew what was happening, but boy, I sure was right, wasn't I? And
Mhm.
so you lose yourself, and you invest in them, and they grow larger and you grow smaller. So
Mhm. It's a scary thing.
it,
It
it's
is.
it's it's pretty horrific, and that's one that, like, it's been a little frustrating for me, and to soapbox a little, to see that become just a common, I'm so OCD type thing of now suddenly the term is in the lexicon, so everyone's using it, and that's what's happening to them. And it's like, there's a difference between someone saying, no, you don't look bad in those jeans, versus where you really do. I'm sorry, I hate to tell, but versus tearing someone apart to where they have to utterly depend on you so that you can control and dominate them. It's
Well, I mean, it is to use a mental health example, and I saw somebody write this in the chat, Zine. It's like one of the most common ones I see. And again, you have to recognize gaslighting happens over time. It's not a one-shot deal. It's a gradual and persistent and coercive act. Um, a common one I see is if a person, say, has depression and they are constantly told it's in your head. You're not sad. It's just a thing you've made up. And if you tell a child that in particular, the child will begin to believe that and internalize it even though they are feeling depressed. And it's a horrible space to be in. And so it's a prolonged thing. It's not like, yeah, it's not you're having a conversation with somebody and they say, I have a different opinion than you. It would be like if I said, Zine, do you remember when we talked about Lucky Charms at the beginning of the stream? and you're like, we didn't talk about Lucky Charms. Like, yeah, no, like we totally did. I mean, it's not going to show up in the VOD because there was a glitch that happened, but like I remember, you were talking about Lucky Charms, and then I keep very systematically, neutrally injecting that in that we talked about Lucky Charms at some point. And you were adamant that you can't stand Lucky Charms except for when you take all the marshmallows out. And you were like, I only like Lucky Charms without the marshmallow. And like, I'm not going to go much farther because it starts to get really weird. And I don't want to like anybody in chat to be like, oh my God, this hits way too close to home. But it's a very systematic thing. If I continually did that every time we talk, just constantly make you think that we talked about something, you start to go like, am I forgetting things? Am I forgetting that I'm talking about certain breakfast cereals and conversations? Because every time we talk, you start talking about things that I don't remember us talking about it, but you have such conviction when you talk about it that like we must have talked about it. And it's this awful sense of dissonance that you would feel over time if we did that, in part because you may trust me as like a friend or whatever. Like I carry a level of power in that relationship in the same way you do with me. It's just there's a lot of dynamics at play in gaslighting.
Right. I saw the question, and you might add to this, but I think, I saw, is gaslighting the same as grooming? And I would say that gaslighting is a specific type of grooming, but
Yep.
grooming has other components that can be a part of it. That grooming is a system of behaviors, where gaslighting is a very specific way of making someone question themselves.
Yep. Yeah, I don't have
Um.
anything I'd add to that.
Okay. What should I do if I feel like my current therapist isn't doing enough? My sister now sees a psychiatrist and likes it more. How do I tell my mom I want a new therapist or psychiatrist?
Mom, I'd like a new therapist because it doesn't seem like it's working. Or either that or talk to your therapist about the fact that it's not working.
Mhm.
One of the worst things that like I as a therapist want to help. Like I'm here because I want the space to be meaningful for you. I want it to feel like it's worth your time. If I don't know that it's not worth your time and you keep showing up and we keep doing whatever, I don't know that it's not worth your time. So if I encourage people usually to talk to their therapist first. Hey, this isn't really working for me. If your therapist gets defensive and shitty with you, get out. If your therapist should be open to it. Should be like, "Wow, thank you for telling me. I really appreciate that you just told me why it's not working." And they'll do one of two things. They'll either adjust what they're doing or they will say to you, "Here is why we're doing what we're doing." Like, here's the reason why I'm having you be uncomfortable in this way. It's because it's part of a treatment plan that I have that I know works because it's, got research support and my experience and whatever. Does that mean you have to continue to keep going? No, not necessarily, but it will give it will give your therapist an opportunity to explain what's going on or hear what you're saying and adjust accordingly and work with you. But if your therapist isn't open to that conversation, get the hell out because that is I truly believe any therapist who is not open to hearing their client's experience is not deserving of your time. You're the consumer of therapy. If it's not working for you, move on. You don't owe it to a therapist to continue seeing them if they're not helping you.
And that's a difficult spot that I mean, even for myself, like I feel like, oh man, I don't want to offend them, I don't want to hurt their feelings, like, but it is as friendly as they are, they're not your friend. It's there to help you, and if it's not helping you, then the relationship needs to change in some way. But
Mhm.
also, I would say that in my personal experience, and I assume you'll agree, but you're welcome to disagree. But keep in mind that you should not be perfectly comfortable at every therapy session. A therapist should be pushing you and making you uncomfortable at times, and not constantly. You shouldn't be like, well, who is this dude? I hate this guy. There's difference between personality and irritation and stuff like that. But them pushing you to face things that you're unsure of is a sign that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're basically nudging you on those boundaries so that you can expand them. It would use
Yeah.
and
I would agree. Change is hard, guys. Change isn't fun. Like there's this joke that kind of happens in the therapy community that I love because it's so true, which is that oftentimes people come to therapy for reasons that aren't the actual reason that they're in therapy. Because usually what happens is in order to help people achieve the change they want, they have to move through the process of change. And the human brain hates that shit. It's uncomfortable. Learning, by the way, learning is a huge chunk of what my education was focused on. Learning happens while we're anxious. Yeah, you don't learn without anxiety. So If therapy is uncomfortable because you're moving in a direction that you want to be moving in, awesome. If therapy is uncomfortable because your therapist is doing unethical things and is not explaining to you what's going on and is harming you and causing significant distress to you, that is a different thing. But therapy has moments where it is uncomfortable. I tell all of my clients, when you first come to see me, you will like me for a while because I'm going to be very empathic. I'm going to listen. I'm going to care about you. I'm going to do all these things. And then there's going to be a point in therapy where you're not going to like me so much because I'm going to move you through the process of change because I'll have done an assessment. I'm going to do it empathically. But if you hang in there through the times where you don't like me, you will like me again. Assume like, and I have had so many instances in my 8 years of doing therapy where that has absolutely been the case, and it works really well. And it's a way of trying to normalize for people that change is not easy. It never is. If you have an expectation that it's going to be easy, it's not a great expectation. Some people are more resilient to change, and it makes it a little bit easier for them. But learning and change happens in the context of anxiety. You can't get away from it as much as people try.
Our brains like to fight each other too because our brains are so good at ignoring usual stimulus. They just drop it out and don't even care. Like, this is standard. This is exactly what I expect, and it's almost like what it wants, but it makes you kind of, for at least for a lot of people, seek that change. But at the same time, then it's like, as soon as something's changed, then it's the anxiety. I don't know what's going on, and your brain's like, what the hell? I had a routine. I knew what I liked and stuff. So
Hmm.
it's an interesting, just in terms of brain chemistry. I don't know if those are different evolved parts of the brain. I mean, you've gotten into lizard brain versus not and stuff like that. I don't know whether any of that's involved, but it is interesting to me just how much it's like we get so used to a certain stimuli that it becomes the norm for us, and yet and that caused us anxiety, so much anxiety before, and yet we are so change adverse, even though our brain's like, nah, I'm bored now, let's do something different. Like, what make up your mind,
Yeah. It's because our prefrontal cortex is so unbelievably complex. It's why we still haven't really been able to hammer down the brain in full. It's an incredible thing, but one of the things we understand a lot about the brain is that it will do anything it can to mitigate dissonance. Like our brain does not want to experience misalignment of expectation and experience, and you have to trace that back to evolution, which is basically like, if you didn't know what was coming, it could kill you. So the brain still has these remnants of like just trying to survive, but we've evolved to a point where like generally our survivability is so high relative to what it was when we were nomads,
all right.
but our brain hasn't caught up with technology. Our brain hasn't, it has not evolved as quickly as all the various things that we enjoy in our lives have. And so a lot of the times these are remnants of things that you can very much trace back to what it was just like to survive back in the day.
Right. And
And
and that's one of the things that I remind people as well, particularly when they're, like they feel so overwhelmed all the time, or and they question themselves, not so much on dealing with the overwhelming, but the questioning yourselves, why am I so anxious? Why do I have to deal with this? Why do we have so much depression, or all these? And I was like, guys, no part of our brain is evolved to handle the world that we're in. Like, this world is built,
nope.
I mean, we went from, and I was I mentioned this earlier, but we went from the Wright brothers and their first flight. 60 some odd years later, we were on the moon. Like, we are moving at a tremendous pace
Yeah, dude.
forward, far, far ahead of evolution and what brain. So, of course, we're going to be overwhelmed. Of course, people are going to need, we're going to, like, just the amount of input going into our brains. Nothing in the history of life, literally, could have prepared us for what's happening right now. And so, yeah, it's okay to be a little stressed out. Like, we just handle it the best we can, but don't think that you're some sort of weirdo for the fact that there's a lot going on right now. But
It's the reason why people report constantly that they are more afraid of heights, spiders, snakes, public speaking than they are cars and guns. Even though cars and guns kill way more people than spiders and snakes. Like, the fact that people can just be around cars and be around guns and just not even bat an eye, but then you put them next to a spider and they freak out. It's because of our brain not evolving to the point where it can register that stuff.
And if you guys want to
So
look at how quickly our brains can get to that point where we take what was previously anxiety and make it mundane and make it and minimize it for ourselves, look at people's interpretations of the pandemic right now. There are still some of us that are very, very like, this is a big deal, guys. Like, and there's people that, because it's been a couple weeks, because nothing's blown up there, because they've gotten used to this new world, that now it's like, what's the big deal? As you know, and again, not to go into politics or whatever, but that's, you can actually see our brains
mhm.
doing that, where we're normalizing and actively taking this huge stress, and being like, well, I survived this long, so obviously it can't hurt me. Same thing with cars, same thing, I mean, all these things, but
Mhm.
it's like the worst form of exposure therapy ever. But here you are, and so
It's
anyway,
why
go
it's
ahead.
why, I'm gonna be careful with how I say this, um, because there is some utility to, we're so distant from it. First of all, we can't see the virus. Second of all, we're very distant from all the stats. But when you see, 100,000 deaths just kind of like thrown around, first of all, our brain doesn't really fathom that many people. But if I walked you into a football stadium where there were 100,000 dead bodies in the stands, that would register.
Hmm.
And so there's this thing that because we have so much space and because we have so like it's not like the Black Plague where people were literally stacked up on the streets and you would see the effect of it and it would freak you out. We're able to maintain distance now in a way that we wouldn't have been able to back in the day, and that has allowed our brains to go and misfire on certain ways of trying to make sense of what's going on. And people are trying to just fill in the gaps as best they can amidst the uncertainty because they're not seeing the actual gravity of, if I showed you the 100,000 people in the football stadium, then walked you next door across the street to this huge plot of land that had every single person that was affected by those 100,000 people being dead, then you'd really have a hell of a perspective on what's going on. But we don't do that. We toss around numbers like, oh, well, at least it's only 5,000 people. At least it's only 10,000 people. At least it's only 100,000 people. It could be worse, is like such a distorted way of looking at it, and so dehumanizing.
Yeah. It made me think about, and to, it's a heavy topic, but it reminds me that it's actually covered by, I don't know if you're familiar with the comic Eddie Izzard, but
I've heard that before.
he's an actor, and so it's one of those that's like, if you see him, you'll be like, oh, that guy, he's a no, that guy, you know. But absolutely hilarious comic, and he's talking about deaths, and he talks about how our brain, you that guy, right?
Just Google him. Oh,
Yeah,
that guy.
yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't
that
want
guy.
to cut you off with
Yeah,
the oh,
no,
that guy, but
I saw
oh,
the
that
face. I
guy.
was like, yep, there it is. But he absolutely hilarious, and he talks about, he's like, our brains can't really handle this, and he's like, you kill one person, and we lock you in a cell and we shame on you. You killed 10 people, we put you in a padded room and we look at you through a little small window and try and study you. But you kill 10,000 people, and our brains can't deal with that. So we're
Yeah.
almost, and the way he's like, so we're almost like, well done, like you must get up very early in the morning, like think of his schedule: death, lunch, death. But the humor base is talking about a real thing, which is just, we can't conceptualize these numbers. We don't have that concept. For me, it helps, like, if you take it, think of your, for me, a high school auditorium, and that holds about 1,500 to 2,000 people in it. So you think, one of those, and then I multiply that by 50, and I think of that just full of bodies. I mean, even a stadium to me, it has a human density that makes it hard for me to comprehend. But I can, I
Hmm.
worked in a studio or an auditorium at high school. I was one of the stage crew guys, and so but whatever you can do to kind of put that number into realism for you, and you start to kind of see, like, oh, wow, okay, that's a thing, that's a hell of a thing. So,
Hmm.
again,
Imagine staring at that and then being asked, um, so do you want GameStop to reopen?
yeah. Well,
I mean, it really, like, I know it's dark, but
yeah,
people, you're right. The brain doesn't have the ability to wrap itself around it. If you make things tangible for people, oftentimes they'll get uncomfortable and sometimes they'll bail. Like, I bet you some people, as we were talking about this, bailed
right.
because the reality of that is so difficult to sit with. And I'm sorry to those who bailed as a result, but like I really think those types of perspectives are so important. It's why in some ways I actually think I'm going to go on a short tangent. I'll keep it
You're
short,
fine.
I promise. It's actually why I think when Reddit got rid of the subreddit Watch People Die, I actually don't know that that was a good thing in the grand scheme of things, because I actually, if you watch various comments about that and various subsets of communities that have kind of gathered as a result of that subreddit no longer being around, many people in that subreddit will say that because of that subreddit, they are infinitely more careful on their day to day life about things, because it has put into perspective just how fragile
Shit,
sometimes things
shit
are.
goes wrong.
Yeah, and, like, not in a way that becomes debilitating where you become agoraphobic because you think everything can kill you, but it gives this perspective to life where people are like, "I appreciate things a lot more, and I just realize how quickly, things can devolve." And seeing the ways in which they can devolve kind of diversifies my perspective on that, and it makes it so that, like, I'm actually more careful as a result. I don't live in a sphere of ignorance as it relates to my ability to move through the world. And I just again, it's all about representation and
Yeah.
perspective and all that sort of things, but just a minor tangent because that was on my mind today. I
That's
was
an
thinking about that.
interesting topic because for me it's like the you have and it's impossible to know the numbers, and then it's impossible to relate to the numbers, but you have a community of people that have so thoroughly desensitized and dehumanized themselves and their experience that they just that they somehow want to pass these around or experience this, and I don't know, I can't even get into the psych, like I don't want to empathize with that and I don't understand it, but recognizing and seeing the Reddit's perspective of this makes it so it normalizes it, and that's bad. You don't want
Mhm.
that to feel mundane. You want it to be shocking. You want it to be extreme. But that's looking at only the people who are commenting and actively taking into account, and you don't know how small a subset that is versus the people that came in, brushed it, and then were like, "Oh my god," and then left. Like
Mhm.
I've seen more than I want to see from there, but I certainly was not a part of the community, sort of thing. It makes me respect a garage door a lot, but
Oh, yeah, those springs are dangerous, man.
but regardless, it's an interesting, like, just philosophical topic, right? There's no answer, there's no correct
Yeah,
yes or no, but just
yeah.
that I hadn't really considered, like, because me, if you'd asked me, I'd been like, no, that's horrible. Again, you're normalizing it, you're making it so that these, the edgy 15-year-olds who are exposing themselves to it and like, haha, look, they all died in this car wreck. Like, what the fuck? Why would we ever want to encourage this? But at the same time, you're right that there's a intangible number, a larger number of people who are now like, dear God, I could die in a car and I could end up looking like this or having that happen. I'm going to be more respectful. I'm going to be more cautious. That's a, I'm gonna, that one's gonna fester with me. So thanks for that. I'm gonna be thinking through that one.
Yeah, it's just I really see it as an exercise in us building a level of distress tolerance for the anxiety that comes along with reality. Like, it's okay if these things make us anxious, but it's also important to have the perspective that comes along with it of like, though this could happen, this also could not happen, and other things are possible too. But it's good for me to have an expanded worldview and expanded expectation of the way the world works. Our brain just constantly wants to categorize things. And oh my goodness, your
I
dogs
need my,
are absolutely
I need my
adorable.
therapy dog.
They are so adorable, dude. I had never seen them until when I popped into stream a while back and saw it. I was like, I forget their names. I'm
This is
sorry.
this is Buffy.
That's
How
Buffy.
dare you
Oh
not
my
commit
god.
that to memory, you
Oh,
bastard?
dude, I'm
Uh,
terrible with names. I golf with people. By the third hole, I forget their name, and they're just you and Bud and
and
Chief
but what's
until I
up?
remember
What's
it.
up, man?
It's
I know the answer
good
to this, but
shot.
I'll let you answer. Is there such a thing as a specialty therapist, and can it be worth it even if you have a normal one? Like, is there a
Yeah,
specific kind of trauma that isn't being properly dealt with due to more recent stressors? I'm not sure what the sidebar there is, but or how that applies, but I
I don't
certainly
know either. But yes, there are therapists who like have various certifications or specialties. Like, for example, for trauma, you could see a therapist who does eye movement reprocessing and desensitization, which is EMDR, which is where it's just a very new, modern, empirically informed approach to working with trauma. Sex therapists, for example, you can have specialized sex therapists where they have gone through a very rigorous training to become sex therapists. By the way, if you ever want to see a sex therapist, do everything you can to see somebody who is ASEX certified, because that is a hell of a credentialing process that they go through and they know their stuff. Um, but yeah, specialty type therapists exist. Usually, what you're going to see is therapists who will say, like, they will advertise themselves as having various forms of expertise. Like, I, for example, advertise myself as working with severe and debilitating anxiety, performance anxiety, social anxiety, OCD, and various other things. And I do that so that people know when they reach out to me, this dude probably knows what he's talking about as it relates to these things. And then I also omit certain things that I do not have a lot of expertise in. So specialty therapists exist, but if you want to talk to one and you're currently seeing a therapist, make sure you coordinate with them to make sure that there's not double treatment, because that's actually unethical for therapists to do, to double treat if they know they're double treating. So let them help you out with that.
And yes, guys, I know that, sex is funny and stuff like that, but sex is a huge source of mental problems, insecurity. There's a lot of things that come from sex and the pursuit of sex.
Yes.
It's an entire genre almost. I don't know if that's the right
Mhm.
word, but specialty, I guess, is the
Mhm.
correct word. But we could all learn a thing or two. But is
There's
it?
I see something in chat. I really want to
Thought
just
you were
touch on
for
really
a second.
quick.
I thought you were looking at me like I had that. Like,
Yeah,
is there a
no,
spider
sorry.
on me? Like, what the
No.
hell?
No, zombie
Zombie
tabby?
Tabby.
Zombie tabby. Eating disorders are something that a person should absolutely see somebody who specializes in it. Eating disorders are kind of their own thing, and it's something that I make referrals for if it's the explicit part of treatment, because eating disorders involve food, and food is something that we actually need in order to survive. So there's a whole level of complexity there, and so that is something that if you or anybody you know in chat or whatever, if you are struggling with eating disorder, find somebody who advertises as working with eating disorders. It's a very important thing to do, because of how same thing with gambling addiction. Gambling addiction is kind of its own thing, as opposed to like drug and alcohol counseling. So if you have a gambling addiction, you should see a gambling addiction specialist as opposed to just a random therapist.
Whew, I walk that line. Not, I mean, obviously, I'm on the safe side of it, but man, I love gambling.
I do too.
I control it through physical distance, but
Yeah. Yeah.
geographically treated.
Our
But
brains love gambling, man.
that because the high of the maybe is just as much as the actually hit. So it's like, but
Do you know the technical term of why it's so difficult and why it's so intoxicating?
no, not that I.
You ever heard it? Intermittent reward.
Hmm.
Which is then the reason that is so difficult for our brain to detangle itself from is because of there's no pattern, so the next one could always be the positive reinforcement. So the brain sort of anticipates that. If you knew that on every 1500th hand of blackjack you were going to win, you would probably not play, or you would just wait until your 1500th hand to lay it down big because you could anticipate it. If you can't anticipate it, but you get a hit every once in a while, you always think it could be the next one, which is why the most dangerous thing ever for a person who has a propensity for gambling is for them to win on the first shot. Like if you throw craps and you hit it big on the first time, that is scary stuff, man, because you get the hit immediately and then it's a chase. So if anybody in chat is struggling with gambling, please know that is something that is very debilitating, and you should absolutely see somebody who is trained to work with intermittent reward and knows how gambling works, because it puts our brain into a really funky spot. You're not making it up if you're struggling with it.
Yeah. It's for me, it's that. Ooh, what could happen next time? For my ex-wife, it was like, and that was a pair of shoes you just lost. Thank you. And it's like,
Mm,
we have different approaches to this. Could you go to the other side of the
yeah.
casino for a bit?
Wow.
You're not gonna want to watch what happens next.
Oh man.
uh,
I
but
had a friend who lost a drum set in a poker game in high school. That was when I stopped playing poker in high. Wait, started to stop playing poker with that group. I
yeah,
was like, oof.
I don't like. I don't know whether it's a conflict aversion or I mean, it's got to be something like that. But I don't like playing against other people. I'd much rather play machines or play games where I'm playing against the house and Inhuman, because I don't want to deal with. Like, I remember one of my worst experiences gambling was I didn't know blackjack very well. I mean, I know how to play blackjack, but I don't know the book, like this is the
Mhm.
right way to play because and so I just sat down and just sure, let's hit. Why not? Let's gamble, And I hit, and I was at a 15 or something like that, and I pulled a 10, and so I busted out, and then the dealer flipped something that didn't bust them out, what the 10 would have, and a guy down the line is like, you took the dealer's bust, and you're not playing, and I'm like, I just want to fucking
Yeah.
do what I want to do, dude. I don't want you
Yeah.
involved in my life at all. Like I don't, and so like it made me not want to be a part of that. Like I don't want to impact your game and make you feel like you're losing. But I just don't want anyway. I was just let me fight against the machine or just watch little cartoons. Boing boing. Oh, 50,
Yeah.
22.
Ooh.
It's
Yeah.
fun. Anyway, I don't have
The
a
way
problem.
casinos are designed is fascinating with all of that
Oh,
too. It's
there's
all designed to make you look at the machines. That's why the carpet's ugly and the ceiling's
mhm.
ugly. You have to look forward. It's why they aren't
No
patterned
no
because you have to walk through
no
the stuff.
clocks, maze like get you
Mhm.
lost in it.
Mhm.
Buffet at the
It
back.
smells good.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, yep. That is all designed. It's fascinating stuff.
Can you explain why hypnotherapy works more for other people than, say, some others, or for some
I
people than others?
unfortunately can't. I don't have much training in hypnotherapy, and I actually don't know anybody who is trained in hypnotherapy. So hypnotherapy is not something I was trained in. I didn't learn much about it, so I unfortunately don't have an answer for you on that one.
I got nothing either, so glad we could help.
Yes, it's a great question, but I
It's
just
just
it's
not
not
our
in my
specialty, right?
not in my purview.
How can I better communicate with my family that I don't or that doesn't suffer from mental illness? Like, how can I explain that things are hard for me that seem easy to them? Uh, oof. I mean, it's just a
Yeah, you
communication.
take that one.
Well, I mean, okay. I would say, I mean, that's a communication barrier, right? Like it's them not understanding. So you're not going to be able to make them feel what you feel when they don't feel that. So it becomes a point of seeing if they can at least trust you on this. They can at least believe you in what you're saying, or ultimately understanding that if they can't see it, if they're not going to feel it, like my discussion would be if you've already tried all the communicating thing, then it's prepping you and making you work towards this point where you understand and accept that they're not going to fully understand and you have to work harder and that's part of the cross you bear and I'm sorry for that, but sometimes people just don't get it and we have to accept that as well as anything. So we can get stuck in this realm where we want people to again we're looking for that validation, but we're like maybe if I just tell them more or tell them differently or do something and do change something, then they'll understand and then they'll really relate. Sometimes people are just unable to, whether it's their own limitation, their own
Mm.
bias, whether they're an asshole or if they're just unable to specifically get it. And because I mean, again, I struggle with that when I'm dealing with anxiety or talking to someone with anxiety. I don't have crippling anxiety. I can't relate to what that like to be stuck in that position. And I try and understand that they are that, and that's hopefully to my credit. But there's a point where people aren't going to be able to understand and experience they aren't experiencing. What's it like to fall if you've never fallen?
Mhm.
Y- How do how do you explain? And so there is a line where you're just stuck. But up to that point, you try and work on communication, open, honest listening, seeing if you can get them to where whether they're in a receptive mood. Like that's one thing that I think I see will do a lot is they don't pay attention to the mood of the other person and recognize their receptivity on what you're about to communicate with them. And so you're talking to a wall because they're in a shitty mood or they're already mad or they're all any number of things versus recognizing they're in a good mood. They've had one drink, but they're not gone. Like now's a good time to talk to them and kind of recognizing and capitalizing on those moments. So I don't know if you have more to add to that or not.
Oh, I mean, that was all really good. I think two things pop into my head. One is, and a lot of us forget to do this. Sometimes one of the most effective things you can do in a situation like that is communicate about how you're communicating. So sometimes I think it's helpful for people to understand, like, hey, I just want to let you know that there's this thing I am wanting to talk about, or I keep trying to talk about. And my experience of it is that, like, it's very hard to do. Like, I'm scared to approach you about this, or I'm worried about approaching you because I'm worried about not being heard. And I really just I want to explain kind of what's going on for me in the hopes that you can help me understand. And your responses to it have been making it difficult for me to want to continue that conversation. I think sometimes that grabs people because it's a form of meta communication of communicating about how you communicate. Like that sometimes can be helpful. The other thing I would say is that like that type of thing is so nuanced because what we're talking about here is not just the input of how the person is showing up and talking about this thing. We're also talking about the reaction to it. And so, if this is where like family therapy can be really helpful because the family therapist can help not just the person say what they need to say, but can help the responder respond the way they need to respond and can do a little bit of work with that and point things out and talk about some of those meta communicative processes that are happening. So it's a good question. It's also a very difficult one. So everything Zine said uh, is is excellent, which is I knew it would be, which is partly why it was easier to let you answer that because I would have had to ask too many assessment
Right.
questions and didn't know how to get away from that.
Gotcha. And the other thing is I mean, you mentioned that it's family, and family comes with its own pile because families are usually there's a whole control structure that like it's rarely of peers, right? Like in a family, there's the bigger brother, the little sister, the adult or parent, or I mean, there's a hierarchy that makes communication just that much harder, and so I mean, if it's your parents don't understand and they don't listen to you because you're just a kid and you're feeling like I mean, if you're a teenager that's like, mom and dad don't understand, one is they might understand a little bit more than you think, but also if it's a genuine, they don't have that experience, they're going to look at typically, I mean, there's always exceptions, but typically they're going to look at it as from a position of authority to where they're not going to put as much weight into what you're telling them. And that's kind of to parents' detriment, in my opinion, but I'm not a parent, so what do I know? But they frequently kind of have that like, no, I'm here and you're here, and I don't care just how bad you feel. You need to clean your room. And there's again,
Yeah.
there's a line there that goes into that of you do have to figure out how to exist and how to meet expectations of other people, who when in that point, and how to live with what you're dealing with, even though you do have a greater burden. But so there's just a ton of dynamics in there that are at play. So we can't tell you just how to communicate other than do your best to communicate well. But there's just too much to it to give a
Openly,
better.
directly,
Yeah,
use I statements. It's the best you can do and hold people accountable to their responses.
right. Is there a way to make a healthy separation between managing expectations and being hopeful? Hmm.
Uh, tough one
Hmm.
because you're talking about two different things. You're basically saying hopeful as a feeling and expectations as a set of like cognitive structures that you're creating for yourself. So, um, I'm not actually entirely sure what that question is asking.
I think they're saying like how to find the line between being overly optimistic versus like where to know where I think this is he'll change versus he's never going to be looking finding that line
Oh,
of being too optimistic about things versus being realistic about them. I think is
oh,
might be
okay.
a better statement or that's how I'd reinterpret that, I suppose.
Um, I think it's about really sitting down and exploring like what is my limit, but even more so of like what's my limit? How will I follow through with ever the consequences for hitting that limit? I can't tell you how many times in my years of doing therapy where I have heard somebody say, I am way past what I ever thought I would be willing to let go. And part of that is because of like cost sunk fallacy and all these other things. But I think most of us don't actually give enough time to considering what our limitations are, where our line is, what is the gray area where we're willing to give some wiggle room, but then what is the hard out or what is the hard in or whatever it might be. Like it's really important to know some idea of what that is and trusting your emotional experience to tell you when it's starting to get past a point of no return. Like lately on my stream, we've been talking a lot about this inner voice of like, how do you know what is yourself or whatever? And like, there's this voice that tends to be pretty unwavering, where you'll often find yourself either trying to convince it of something or affirming it or whatever, but it stays generally pretty consistent throughout. And I think most of us know what I'm talking about of like, it's kind of that nagging thought that just won't go away no matter how badly you want it to go away. Um, that is something that will sometimes start to speak up a lot more. And when you start attempting to like convince that voice that it's like wrong in some way or like try to avoid it or whatever, I think that's usually a point of pause for a person. And then to realize, like, does the data suggest that this person is going to change? And also, have I communicated to this person what my set of expectations is? Because it's not fair to hold people to a set of expectations you haven't articulated. And so it's kind of a call to action on that. If I have articulated my expectations and the consequences for violation of this, maybe it's time to cut my losses and lose some of the hope. Or is the hope still okay because there's enough data to suggest that it's okay to hang in there, but does it mean there might need to be some kind of change? That's kind of the best I can give off of your clarification.
Better than I can do, man.
Yeah.
There's also a conversation going by in chat right now that someone expressed that they had people in their life fake depression and use that as an excuse to get things. And so, how do they know, or how do they react it and deal with that? That's like, I would say, at least from my perspective, if that's an individual toxicity, not about depression themselves, and something, if they're that it's a manipulative person, and that's just the particular method they've chosen to manipulate you. It's not that all depression, or even the majority of people like that, or that express depression, or have to deal with that sort of stuff, are behaving in that way. So if you're asking in general, how do you know that depression is real? I mean, besides just yes, it is. I generally assume and interpret and act as though it's genuine, because it most likely is. Most people who aren't shitheads don't use depression or other manipulative things in order to try and get their way. If you're talking about a specific person, how do you know when they're actually depressed versus when they're just saying it? That's a person that you'd want to evaluate your relationship with, because that if they're to the point where they're just manipulating you, or you don't trust that they aren't manipulating you, then there's more fun. That's a fundamental thing about the relationship, not about how do you properly recognize their correct depression sort of moments. What do you think?
I do want to say, so everything you just said, totally with it. The one thing that I will say is that when people either like fake a mental, that's a hard one to kind of quantify and say like this person's faking it. So I think you covered that part of it. But when people say things like, I wish I had a mental illness, or like even if it's internally, right? Like, so maybe I'm going to act as if I have one. Often the reason I think people do that is because they see the attention that that garners. And it does inherently, right? Like if a person is struggling with depression, it's going to likely get some level of attention from either other people or self or what. It has this like these reinforcement mechanisms that like, depression sucks. I've never met a person that says they like depression. It's not a fun thing to experience. But sometimes, depending on the context you're in, that can actually call in a level of support because a person has articulated what's going on for them, and there's maybe even some form of like treatment plan or understanding around it. You can apply that to any other mental illness you want to apply it to. So when people see that that garners a level of attention, sometimes if people don't have this like good template for how you get your needs met and how to articulate yourself, they will make this like inductive decision that if I act like this or if I do some of the things that are manifestations of legitimate mental illness, I will get the attention that I want and I will get certain needs met that I'm not fully sure how to articulate otherwise. So that doesn't mean it's okay to fake a mental illness. It certainly doesn't mean it's okay to say, I want one. I guarantee you don't if you don't have one. But I do look at it too as like there's a level of attention seeking that happens within that too. And it can also have the manipulative component too. It's a very complex thing, like a very complex thing. Um, so,
When
yeah.
I get really mad at people, I want to go punch windows. Is there a better way to get my anger out? I feel like, that's more just do you have any anger coping mechanisms? Because I think we can all agree pretty offhand there's probably better ways than punching windows. I mean, at the very least, and I will
Yeah.
say that if you're at a certain point, then punching a pillow or a mattress might be even, help you out a little bit, at least for myself in that moment. That gets into, I think, some pretty dangerous things that Dr. Mick might be able to talk about, because there's lines of in genuine anger expression that can cause dissociative behaviors, and that gets kind of crazy. So I don't want to go too far
Yep.
into that for myself, and I don't know whether you can or not, or if that gets to a point where you can't answer, but just the general level. But I mean, at the very least, if you are like literally like just uncontained rage, then at least find something soft. That like a mattress is really just something to. Sometimes you just got to yell and kick and scream a second, get it out. But there's probably better ways even beyond that. So I'll turn that over to the expert.
Can you read me the question one more time?
When I get really mad at people, I want to go punch windows. Is there a better way to get my anger out?
Okay. So thanks for rereading that, because then here's what just I remember it. So the thought of punching windows is not punching windows. And I just want to make that point really quick, because sometimes people will have even like darker thoughts when they're angry, like,
Sure.
you know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, even self harm.
Thoughts are not behaviors. So wanting to go punch a window, cool. Like, there's really nothing wrong with that, because you're just thinking about it. Actually doing it is where we have an issue. So the acknowledgement of the anger is important. Recognizing that, what is the utility of punching the window? Is it because it creates a form of grounding, in the sense that, like, when my fist hits the window and cuts my hand, I then feel it and it pulls me into the present and diverts my attention off of the anger? A lot of people who actually, I'm going to give a quick disclaimer. I'm going to be very surface level about it, but I'm going to talk about cutting for just a second. People who cut often do so. It's a maladaptive coping mechanism, but they often do it because it allows them to either feel something that they're wanting to feel, or avoid another emotion in lieu of the pain that they experience when they cut. Um, so there is this like grounding that happens in pain, where like we basically feel so emotionally harmed that we want to experience the physical component of it, so that we can release it. We can kind of have that like endorphin rush, or like we can just get it out. And when people say, well, punch a pillow instead, punch a punching bag, all these sorts of things, I think that's okay, but I think those things are stopgaps.
Mm-hmm.
Because if a person
I agree
only
with that.
learns that the way to manage your anger is to have a physical manifestation of that anger in a form of aggressive behaviors, then they don't learn other coping strategies and other grounding exercises and other mental ways of walking your way through that, particularly when you're an adult, that may have less physically punishing outcomes along with them. So it's okay to have the thought of wanting to punch a window, but we may want to direct our focus elsewhere. And it's easier to do that while we're not angry, to create a plan so that we can recognize when the anger is happening. Also, generally, rage comes because it's an accumulation of anger that hasn't been acknowledged up
Yes.
until that point, which is why I always preach, monitor your emotional experience, because if you don't acknowledge it, it's going to find its way to out. It just is. It's going to grab your attention. Anxiety is going to do it. Depression is going to do it. Anger is going to do it. Sadness is going to do it. It's going to find its way out. So if you keep stuffing it, it's going to come out in ways you don't feel like you can control. As opposed to, if you're constantly monitoring it, you can make healthy decisions along the way.
See, bet he's the expert. I'm like, well, I guess if you want to, you can just do something soft. I don't know.
I mean, your thoughts are good too.
Yeah, but like what yours are much more or systemic, where mine's more just an acute in the moment. Like I mean, I've been at that point where I've was frustrated or sad or whatever, and overwhelmed, and it was something in that moment. It wasn't like, boy, that worked really well. I'll carry that with me through all the rest of my problem solving needs. But in that moment, that sometimes we can get overwhelmed, and it's just like obviously I would say the proper coping mechanisms are by far the best, but there gets to for me a certain point where it's like, at the very least, mitigate any damage. Like, just like find some way, if you are out of control, can you at least minimize your out of controlledness? And I don't know whether that's possible or not, if you're just in full lizard brain or not, but regardless, there's points where I feel like I can't control myself, but I can at least control my uncontrolled behavior slightly, which sounds like incorrect, but like something's gonna happen, but you can at least try and guide yourself in that moment. I don't know. Again, I think obviously the better coping mechanism, and certainly what you said about the rage, where if you're getting to that point, you've accumulated. It's not like you go from zero to that.
Right.
You've let yourself accelerate to that point. And so that's each mile per hour that you up to that point of craziness is another unacknowledged, unresolved situation where you've let that fester and grow within you to a point where you are that susceptible. So the better course is to stop you from ever getting to that point.
Dude, I love that metaphor because it's like if you decided you were going to drive your car and then you fell asleep while you were idling and you like forced yourself to fall asleep while you were idling and you woke up and you were going 150 miles an hour into oncoming traffic. That is basically what you're doing if you force yourself to stuff those incremental miles per hour and don't see yourself as having control over the gas and the brake, because the anger response we don't necessarily have control over, but we absolutely have control over the way we fuel that emotional experience and over the behavioral manifestation of that anger. And people will sometimes use the "I can't do that" as an excuse to not put in the effort. It's called anger management for a reason. It means anger exists, we're going to manage it, not we're going to make your anger go away. um, and it's just anger's a part of life. It's a primary emotion that we experience, but we have to create plans for it, so that it's not a if I get angry, it's a when I get angry, I will X. Like it's a small language shift, but it's a very important one. It's the same thing with anxiety. Not if I get anxious when I go out and do this thing. When I get anxious when I go out and do this thing, I will do X. Um, I think can sometimes make a difference for people. And sometimes the other shift is important if you do, then X. But sometimes if you plan for it, it takes power away from it. Like instead of it being this thing that's just going to jump out and grab you.
That actually hits really, really close to me because what I've found for myself is I have a breaking point, and where it's I and I've spent my life moving that further and further away from me. But one ex girlfriend in particular was really good at pushing me to a point. But there hits a point where it's the the sea red, the adrenaline, the just I am almost in a blind rage kind of thing, and I break things or just lash out in some way in a very unhealthy manner. I've put my hand through walls. I've
Hmm.
and these aren't necessarily things you'd expect coming from me, but it's just I recognize that's I hit that point and the adrenaline kicks in, and I one of the things that stuck with me was again that same ex-girlfriend, but she said, like I just kind of not to get into this exact situation, but she was like, you weren't
Hmm.
you weren't aware of what you were doing. And it's what I have done to recognize that and realize I'm not trying to handle like I've never taken steps to try and figure out what to do at that point, because I know that at that point I don't that there aren't steps. But what I've done through my throughout my life, basically upon recognizing this, is I have done what I can to mitigate, to keep myself from getting to that point, to extend the point of you guys have never seen me mad. You can get me pretty frustrated, but I have a tremendous capacity for frustration and getting to that point where I'm just like irritated, but still not at that rage mad. And I've just pushed that as far away as I can. So again, I think that kind of meshes pretty close to what you're saying, of just work on keeping yourself from being to that point and getting to that point, and the points where you are in control, and control yourself away from that rather than letting things escalate and hit that point. So again, both I de-escalate or try and find de-escalated behaviors, and then also just worked on my own personal, and I couldn't tell you how I do this other than just trying to make sure I don't hit that point more and
Right.
more and more and further and further of having a higher capacity before I get ragey, before I get so frustrated and so angry about things. So,
I would say if for anybody who's watching this who's curious, um, not this past week, but the prior week before, on stream, I was playing Escape from Tarkov. And for those who don't know how that game works, incredibly intense. Just yeah, there's a lot to it. I had a moment on stream where I actually got angry. Like, I legitimately got angry and went through a whole process that I've worked on in my life of how to handle when I get angry. And I basically went through the whole I did it while I was live. I went through the whole thing. Um, I'm not saying that to like toot my own horn. I'm saying like if you want a tangible example of what that can look like when you hit like rage status, because I was super freaking mad when it happened. It was about 15 minutes of de-escalation, and me talking through it, trying to use everything I know about both myself and about like how that works to kind of walk people through it to model it. So if you're curious about that, the VOD is out there. And I can send it to anybody who wants to see it if you do want to see it. But just as an example of like watching somebody in a gaming context do that, I think can be super helpful to watch it. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Interesting. I mean, that'd be pretty neat to see. I mean, just in like to see the active handling and stuff like that. But we all have that capacity. We all have that line and that okay, well, shit's real now, and so really the best thing we can do, I think, is as much as possible understanding not everything is in control, but as much as possible try and avoid that.
The most
Um,
important thing you can do in that moment is to do what you can to get your prefrontal cortex to re-engage. If you get flooded and it flips off, you got to know what it's going to take to bring it back. For me, it's walking away and getting something to ground myself. In that case, it was a cool glass of water. Like that's the place to start. How do I get my brain re-engaged?
I mean, we all need to ask ourselves, how do I get my prefrontal cortex to re-engage? Like it's just
Put
whenever you
that on a
can
bumper
put, yeah.
sticker.
Let's add that to the quote bot for Dr. Mick.
Hmm.
Evie the Levy, I'm not sure I'm getting your name right, but I don't really enjoy anything I used to. I tried to find new hobbies to do, and yes, it starts out enjoyable, but like others, it just stops being a hobby. It stops being enjoyable and becomes something I stay away from. Sorry, this isn't really related to anger. That sounds to me like pretty classic depression, untreated depression. Or that's where I'd start off with. I assume Dr. Mick would probably need more assessment questions before he could really go into that. But if you have anything you want to just talk on enjoyment, or if you notice you're not enjoying things you did previously, or have a hard time finding passions, I think you might be able to go a little more general term there.
Yeah. So I work with performance anxiety, and this is where I see this a lot. Um, People when they start a new hobby or skill, they generally are very excited about it when they start, in part because it's novel, and our brain absolutely loves novelty. It makes time slow down. There's an emotional investment in it. It's really cool, and we get really excited about it, and you see massive gains at the outset, right? Like the second I picked up my guitar for the first
Mm-hmm.
time and was able to play a C versus a D chord, for example, I was it was like huge because now all of a sudden if I could play three chords, I could play songs, and there's like just leaps and bounds in terms of the types of like improvements. But what happens over time is you hit a wall where all of a sudden the leaps and bounds become more and more incremental, and absolute mastery of something takes a significant amount of time, and it
Diminishing
takes
returns.
exactly right. And a lot of people do not have the distress tolerance that it takes in order to handle the anxiety associated with all of a sudden not basically not doing as well as they are expecting they should do based on the fact that things were growing and exciting at the very beginning. So that's a normative process. What it really takes is discipline to get through it, because that's when people lose motivation and they lose the emotional drive. And if you're a person that completely operates on motivation, it's too fleeting and unreliable. Discipline is when you keep doing something even when you don't want to do it because you know there's a long-term gain. And so developing discipline is a really important thing to hang in there with hobbies, because if you hang in there with it, you'll start to see the fruits of your labor. It's just fewer and far between, and it's a little bit more and more imperceptible over time until all of a sudden you're doing something at a very good level and you see a novice who looks at you and says, "How on earth do you do that so well?" And you then realize the accumulation of your efforts. So
And
that's what I'd say about that.
that hits all of us. And I mean, I hadn't even thought about that, but you're right that, I mean, and again, just giving a personal experience to back that up. Very recently, I've taken to Twitch Sings on on streams and stuff like that, and I do it intermittently. And it's been a lot of fun to kind of like start studying into how do you sing better, how do you do these things better, and just really watch a lot of progress. And now I've like kind of looking back, I'm like, wow, I've just plateaued. Like, why have I just hit that? And it's like, wait, because it became hard. Like at first it was
Mm-hmm.
easy to learn and to grow and to change, and like, wow, I can just see. And now it's like I've got to work for those little inches of improvement and stuff like that. And so you find that point where the hobby hits the work to go into perfecting it, and you have to decide, is it staying a hobby? Am I getting better? And
Yep.
just that. But yeah, I think that's a pretty normal course, and yeah, like, obviously a completely different take than kind of how I saw that, which was just but I took more from that initially. I think you were the more correct on the particular question, but I was thinking in terms of not enjoying things you previously had enjoyed and losing that interest on
It is a
everything.
symptom of
and,
depression.
and so that's where I'm like, wait, to me depression is very easily identified by your entire world is just grayer. Like
Yep.
if you talk to the person and their entire worldview is just nothing's as good as it was. Nothing's as happy, nothing brings as much joy, nothing, like they have less motivation, just all those things. Like that's the blanket of depression that keeps you from fully enjoying life, kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
is the first thought that comes to my mind. Granted, I
Mm-hmm.
also projecting that a little bit, or at least sensitive to it. I don't know if projecting, but sensitive to it because that is my own
Sure.
experience. Um,
Absolutely.
so, is there a good solution to a feeling of being scared to talk to someone out of a fear of adding stress to them? I recently feel guilty because I'm worried I tell someone something I feel because I know it will stress them out, and I don't want to make their life harder. So I bottle up, but the guilt hurts. Is there something I can do? Sorry, it's too specific. That's not too specific at all. That's something that's fairly common, I think.
Let them tell you if you're burdensome. Like, I seriously, guys, like I I run into this just all the time, and all it is just people making things more difficult for themselves.
Very common.
Like, let a person tell you that you're too much if you're too much. Like, for most of the time, people are not going to see you as burdensome in the ways that like you think you're being burdensome. What often happens is people will do one of two things. They'll do the thing that's described in that question, which is they will pull out from saying things that they need, and then they will over time accumulate resentment for other people because they're not like operating in a good way around them, but it's because they haven't stated what they need to state. They haven't said what they need to say, and it perpetuates this worry that they're burdensome because now if you say something, people are probably going to do something about it because you don't talk very often. And so then it fuels this thing. Or people think they're burdensome and then just project that shit into other people and will act as if they are burdensome, which most people find to be incredibly annoying. Where like if you basically act to other people as if you are burdensome and tell them that they think you're burdensome, you have stripped away the autonomy for a person to actually accept you or show you that you're worthy or just engage with you because they don't find you to be burdensome at all. Let people have their responses to you. And if a good friend is a person who would say, "Hey, you've been a little bit much for me lately, and I need to set some boundaries. It's not because I don't like you. It's just because it's a little bit much for me, and I've got a lot going on, and I just need to set a few boundaries with you. But let's try and work it out." That's a good friend. If a person is just letting you walk all over them because they're not stating their own needs, well, that's not great either. But like the chances are you are not as burdensome as you think you are, and that you're actually making yourself burdensome by thinking you're burdensome because it's going to change your interaction style and it's going to annoy the shit out of the person you're interacting with.
Right. And I've dealt with this quite a bit, and like I said, I see this is super common. I almost everybody who messages me, seeking advice or wanting to talk, it starts off with, "I'm sorry to be a burden. I'm sorry to
Hmm.
bother you. I'm sorry to etc." And all of that, like it even goes back to me telling people, and you tell them as well, feel free to message me, feel free to DM me, to ask questions. I am open to that. And but it's an anxious response to have that like distrust, or disbelief, I guess. But understand that it's also like, part of that is either you trust this person or you don't. Do you trust me to tell you and to be in control of our experience or my personal feelings? And so if I have a limit, then I will say and express this is my limit. If you don't trust that person, you can try and have that conversation, but you might not believe them. But you're getting to different levels of the relationship and that are involved. But certainly there's always that anxiety of opening up to someone, of feeling, and I think that part of that is, I don't want to be burdensome, but it also like kind of ties really directly to, I don't want to be judged by them. I don't want them to think I'm a terrible person. I don't like all of those things. It comes down to, you are worthy of being listened to. You are worthy of having your feelings, and the anxiety based around that is more to do with you not believing that you're worth it than anything to do with whether or not that person feels like you're worth it. So you try and take what they tell you, because they'll communicate it. If they haven't, then you can ask them, but that involves you believing or trusting their answer. But it is much more about just believing for yourself and working with yourself to believe that time spent on you is not a waste to the other person, because I think you're worth it, and I'm sure they feel you're worth it. And if it gets to a point, like for me, there are points in that there are people in conversations where I'll either disengage and just kind of, I can, ghosting is not the right term, but I can wind a conversation down or lead things kind of to an ending point. Or if if they're not picking up on those contextual clues, then I'm like, okay, listen, we've talked about this. I've told you everything I had to tell you. I don't feel like you're hearing me. So this is something you've got to work on, but I can't be of further assistance. If you have some other problem, then feel free to talk to me, or perhaps, I might open up other doors, but this is dead. We've covered it. And that's the, not burdensome, but there's a limit. You have to trust the other person and what they're telling you. But more than likely, my bet is it's about a self-confidence thing where you don't feel like you're worthy of it, and you are.
Yep. We wouldn't offer this stuff if we weren't willing to do it. Like,
right.
Like when I say to people, if you need help finding a therapist in your area, reach out to me. And like it's the same thing. It's people will reach out to me and be like, "I'm so sorry to burden you." And it's like, I offered this. I wouldn't offer it if I wasn't willing to do it. Like it just wouldn't be a thing. So yeah, trust that other people are autonomous enough that they will tell you. It's so important. I know you and I agree very much on this. Like
right.
Like we fall in the same camp on this.
And some of you, some of you might end up in a difficult relationship where the one person's not willing to talk. Like, it is possible, but that's you have to kind of just, at some point, someone has to trust someone. So either it's not a collaborative discussion and it's not an open conversation, and you don't have that level of you talk. At which point, why are you trying to have that talk? Or you've got to believe. So
yep.
All right, I've hopefully turned that mouse that keeps ending up on your face over so that it doesn't. You've been attacked by a cursor several times. People are like,
Nice.
"You're trying to pick Dr. Mick's nose again," and I'm like, "I'm sorry. It's such a prominent nose. It's so large. I don't know. It looks fine. Don't worry. Don't feel insecure, even though you should."
Should I?
No.
No wonder I've been feeling something on my. Yeah, okay, did I get it?
You know
Chat,
what? What I've cut, and it actually took a doctor in the chat to help me out here, but I have a thing with my allergies that when I start talking, I guess the nerves in your the inflamed from allergies are the same ones that feel like kind of on the exterior of the skin too. And so I constantly feel, when I haven't had my allergy medication, like I have a hair in my nose, and it's just and it is the worst thing. And I fought it, like, because I talk a lot, during streams, and I'm just sitting like, "Sorry guys, I'm just like, I can't. And finally, like, the doc was like, just go take some Claritin and come back. You'll be fine. And it was like,
changed your life.
Oh, that's nice. But then I don't talk. Anyway, this is a little tangent. But at any rate, how are you feeling? Are you feeling pretty good? You still got a little bit more in you?
I probably got about 25 minutes left.
All right.
So
I'm doing
further than that, but that's about it. I can feel it creeping.
Oh yeah. No, it's almost 1:30, my friend. Okay, you're living the big life.
a.m. here in Chicago. Yep.
Living the big life. I love the cityscape behind you still, though. That is
I do as
beautiful.
well.
Yeah,
It's a
I assume
beautiful
so.
city.
I've got the most gorgeous view of a house like 2 feet away from me. It's just
Nice.
beautiful. Like, it's just right there. There's good sighting. It's a taupe. It's wonderful. So
Really ties
it
the
really
block together.
ties the block together. Although I do, people are like, "How can you scream and stuff without bothering your neighbors?" And I'm like, "Well, I've got air gaps for one that
Yeah,
are,
you live in a
I
house.
live in a house, so that pros and cons, pros and cons."
That's right.
Um, I've been diagnosed with depression for over a decade, and I'm almost 19. While I'm trying to find a career path, everyone says do what you love, and you'll always be happy. But I'm scared that even if I got everything I wanted, happy isn't a realistic expectation. I have very little energy, so even when I try to do what I love, I get exhausted. And then I kind of trail off. I don't know what the question is, but just what basically the what do I do when I'm not sure I'll ever be happy. I'd probably turn that one over to like for me, I would say, that sounds like it's very untreated, and that there is a capacity, and when you find the right medication, when you find the right therapist, when you find your right coping mechanisms, and you work on it, like you can you can lift the blanket of depression off, and you can experience life in full color. It takes work and it takes dedication, in order of trying different medications, and not giving up on the first one. To go back to motivation versus discipline, a lot of people, they try their first antidepressant, and when it's not the right dosage, when it's not exactly the right medicine, they're like, well, this doesn't work. And it's like there are a tremendous number of possible combinations, and everybody's different. So work with your doctor to find to try and find that, if they feel like that's the right route for you. But you're concerned that life will always be the muted gray of having the blanket of depression over you, and there are ways to get that off and flip it off, and you've got to work with a doctor or therapist or whomever, and work towards that. Anything you want to put on?
Yeah, I mean, depression, first of all, wants you to believe that. Depression has this way. I'm going to speak of it as like it's this external entity, for which I think I might have
It
done
very
even
much
last time.
is.
But like it wants you to believe that. So that's just in that way, in the very meta way. That's depression talking. Um, I agree with everything Zine just said. I will say that working through depression is immensely difficult, and depression is it just makes it difficult to fight through it because it requires a lot of energy that most people with depression just don't have. And so, not having the energy, and I mean this lovingly, not having the energy to do the things that are inevitably going to help you move through depression, if you want to move through depression, is not a good excuse. That it does require a level of effort that is going to probably be painful for a bit, because depression is uh, such a heavy blanket that, and people struggle when I say this sometimes because it sounds so invalidating of depression. But like the thing is, there is heaps of research that shows that one of the ways to catalyze moving through depression, aside from medication, if that's the course of action, is to be active, is to get up,
Hmm.
is to eat, is to establish a routine, is to form connections with others, even if they're not the best. Like, is to at every waking depression's relentless. It's to at every waking moment create that new set of expectations and do those things despite feeling like shit because of the long-term gain. Depression takes so much discipline. And so when Zine said it sounds like it's not being treated well, I mean, I often think about it in this way of like, however a person's being treated for depression, if it's not working, it's likely that they're not learning enough about how to be disciplined despite the depression and continue to do the things that are going to be good for them even when it's hard. And that person should be empathizing with how difficult depression is through it, because it is
Hmm.
an immensely difficult thing to deal with. But if you let depression talk its way into your head, it will win. Like, it will absolutely win if you don't fight it. Depression has to be fought. It can't. It has to. You can acknowledge it and appreciate it, but it has to be fought. Anxiety needs appreciation, but depression's gotta. You gotta kind of kick it in the ass a little bit.
I speak pretty passionately to this one, and just again, this
Yeah.
is right in my wheelhouse. But a couple things that stand out there. to take further is just I think the external entity. I think it was me that spoke of it first, that, and then you agreed with it, but because that's exactly how I see it. To me, depression is a companion that I have to deal with, and I've
Hmm.
figured out how to deal with it, but it never goes away. I've never gotten rid of it. And when I'm sad, then it shows up and it's like, hey, remember me? And I'm like, yeah, you can screw off. But a couple things to add to that. One is that depression lies to you. It tells you that your friends don't love you. It tells you that people don't love you. It tells you that feel better if you just lie around. That you don't feel like doing anything. That you don't enjoy anything. That you should like. It does. The thing that's the most insidious about it for me is that is all the symptoms of depression are further perpetuate depression. It is
Yes.
just so self fulfilling. But I do want to make very clear, as tiring when you're depressed and you're dealing with that, one of the most the words that come to mind the strongest is just exhaustion and or tired. You're just tired of it. You're tired of dealing with things. You're tired of fighting it, and so it's hard to hear that you have to always fight it. Please understand that as you get better at it, as you move away from its center of lies, and as you push yourself through these, it does become easier, and it's something where it's like I don't work hard every day. It's not that exhaustion every day to fight it. It's pretty much just in a bottle. And yes, it's there. And when I get particularly sad, then it makes things a little bit worse. But for the most part, I've built the habits and I've built the mechanisms to where it's very contained, and it is not a constant exhaustion. So I agree completely with what you're saying, but I also want to give some hope and some idea there that yes, you constantly fight it, but that fight becomes uh, I would even say like almost easy. Not like easy is a good aspiration, but it becomes very routine and very methodical and non-draining, I guess is the better way. You recognize it, you realize that you handle it, and you move on. It's not that like when you're in the throes of it or when you're still dealing with it, that just oppressive weight on your shoulders anymore. I mean, and that's kind of the goal. And one of the follow-up questions or comments is that as I've gotten to a point where I've had depression so long that I'm afraid what I'll be like when I'm not depressed, so I'm scared to get treatment. This all
Yep.
kind of goes with it. The worst thing that can happen from you trying to get your depression treated is that you will be happier. I mean, I get, or like, I mean, I suppose maybe it's like the worst thing that could happen is that nothing happens because you don't get a proper course. But really, that's what you're up against. Is like, well, I could either be where I'm at or I could try and be happier. And your life, in my opinion, and this might be philosophical, but your life pretty much is encapsulated by the pursuit of happiness. That is what your point is. That is what you're trying to do for yourself. Is find your happy, pursue it with everything you've got in you, and don't let anything get in your way, with the exception of like not hurting people. Societal rules, of
Right.
course, but generally speaking, why would you ever put a barrier in front of yourself between you and being happy? The doctors and the treatments and the research and all of these different support mechanisms all exist as a way to help you be happier in your life. So please use them. No one's judging you, or no one who understands what the hell they're talking about rather is judging you, or is going
Right.
to be against you trying to be happy. So don't put that limit on yourself. And again, that is depression making you scared of fighting it. Depression just makes you not want to deal with it and makes you want to relish in it. You want to feel shitty. You put on your shitty playlist. This is my depression playlist. I play these songs when I feel bad because those songs help you feel bad. I close the blinds when I feel bad because the darkness helps you feel bad. You lie in bed, you do all these things because it helps you wallow in your depression. And that's what the cycle is that you have to break.
Yep.
I speak passionately about this. I'm sorry.
No, don't you dare apologize, Zine. Don't you dare apologize. No, it's awesome. I mean, and you have, I mean, I appreciate so much your openness with your firsthand experience of it. In the same way that you say, you don't struggle much with anxiety. I have not struggled with depression. Like I don't have the personal I have the clinical experience working with many people who've been depressed and have learned about it and have an academic understanding of it, but I don't have the lived experience of depression in the same way that you do. So I love how articulate you are about that. I mean, just to kind of like the final point I would make in relation to this is like sort of like what you were saying. Depression creates people create bad habits when they are
Hmm.
depressed, like really bad habits. And moving human beings into a new set of habits is very difficult to do, and it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy. But to give a little bit of, like, in some ways, academic support to what you were saying, developing those new habits once they are in makes it way easier to navigate because you have created good, healthy habits for how to manage the depression when it comes up. And it will also help people, as a byproduct of this, helps people separate what is sadness from depression. Because sometimes people get into this uh, space where they think, well, if I'm not depressed, then that means I can never be sad, because if I'm sad, then it's going to send me back to depression. And depression is not sadness so
Nope.
much as depression is a baseline mover down to, like, where it is like gray, like Zena said, the gray area,
It's a
or like the heavy
multiplier in
wet
my opinion.
blanket. Yeah. It's a wait, what did you say?
I think of it as a multiplier. When I feel sad, the depression makes it feel
Mhm.
more worse. But I also recognize that, like, it's a different feeling, it's a different color. I realize these are abstract comments, but I think the people who are dealing
Mhm.
with this are going to understand. But it's there. There's that I should feel sad, and this is a sad thing. Point, and then there's this, like, I am over the top, like, and it's not melodramatic, but just that disproportionate amount of
Mhm.
sad versus the whatever's actually causing it, and so being able to recognize and accept, yeah, sometimes things happen and we're sad, like
Yeah.
Chloe is my puppy. She's 14 and a half years old. Like, I'm gonna have to let her go soon, and that's gonna be hard, and that's sad to me, and that I should be sad, and that's appropriate, and that's correct. But the depression would be, I'm going to not leave the room for a week afterwards, or disconnect all contact, and just, sit there and relive those last moments, that pain and that difficulty, and tell myself, like, to get into those cycles, the spin cycles, and just sit in that storm, and let it kind of batter me. That's the depressive side, and that's the side that I'm like, I'm going to feel sad, and I'm going to acknowledge, I'm going to accept, I'm going to deal with that, because it is a sad thing. But I'm not going to let it control me. I'm not going to lose control, and I'm not going to feel this inappropriate emotion, and to this extreme. So,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
but yeah, the sad playlist thing, guys, is, I'm sorry, it is in my opinion, again, it's a real thing. I had to give up songs that I absolutely love for a long time, like years, and I can go back to them now, and it's okay. But I literally had to step away from those songs that were part of me, because they were a part of me, because that's a part of me that as much as I cared about it, that's the part of me that's holding me back. It's a part of the ball and chain behind you. And yes, you identify with it, but those songs are songs that you have habitualized yourself to a point where they now reinforce those feelings, and perpetuate the cycle that you're in. So I realize it seems extreme, but honestly, I feel like the sad music playlist is a very big modifier, because the music has such a strong emotional impact
Mhm.
on many people. That is an important one. At least it was for me. If you're not moved by music that much and you don't really care, then fine. That, it's a personal choice. But that's actually a big one in my opinion.
Yeah. I would agree. I would absolutely agree.
So, all right, let's find a couple and wrap it up. Uh, one thing I saw go by in chat, and it's a very common. Well, okay, I don't want to diminish the feeling, but I see it usually in many of these conversations, which is just I'm sure you've heard it many times. I've done therapy for X years for X, Y. I've tried X things and it doesn't work. None of it works. What do I do? Do you have a response to that? Because I don't. I'm like, well, sucks to be you, but I'd say keep working at it, because the pursuit of life or pursuit of happiness is worth it. So keep trying. But I don't know that that's really the best answer. So,
Um, I'm just gonna give the raw answer to this one, because this is a delicate one,
mhm.
and it's more. So one of the biggest factors of whether therapy is going to work is a person's commitment to it,
Mhm.
and their willingness to fight through the discomfort of what therapy is going to bring. But also, another factor with that is the relationship that the person has to the therapist. those two things are out of whack, there's a good chance that therapy's not going to work. When people hear me say that, they often think what I'm doing is blaming a person for not working hard enough in therapy. Um, it's not so much that, but it can be. Like the reality of it is that sometimes when people are actually brought up to the point where they realize that therapy is going to have to make them really sit down and form some difficult new habits and really just cut into some stuff that's hard to sit with, they don't have the distress tolerance for it, they'll often bail. The thing is, there is only so much I can do. I can't, we could have this whole conversation about the struggle you're having with the relationship you have with your mom. And there's these things you really want to say to your mom, but your mom won't come into therapy. So I can't facilitate it in therapy. So I work with you to come up with what you're going to say to your mom. I cannot go home and be you and say those things to your mom. At the end of the day, you have to use what you're learning in therapy and what's happening in therapy. And if you don't trust your therapist, then find a new therapist. But if you trust your therapist enough and you can recognize that the anxiety you're experiencing as it relates to your therapy is because you're just afraid to do some of the things that therapy is asking you to do, um, tell your therapist for one, but it may mean that like you're going to have to do them or else, because again, your therapist can't do, I'm with you for an hour a week. You've got all the other hours of the week that you got to do it on your own. I'm there to support, but I can't make change happen. And sometimes people have a very unrealistic expectation of therapy that they're going to go talk to a therapist and everybody else in their life is going to change. I can only change or help change the people who are in the room with me. That's it. I assume that everybody outside the room is completely static and will not change unless they come into my room. So that's kind of my answer for that. If it's not working, it could just be you haven't found the right cocktail yet between therapist and whatever other things are going to help. But I do think that sometimes when people say that, it's a call for some level of personal accountability for how the person's engaging with and using therapy.
Better than I could say. So, but I don't know that you need me to agree, but I agree. Well done. Bravo. This one is actually here. Allow me. How do you go about finding a therapist and knowing if they would be a good fit for you? Well, did you know that DrMickLive has on Thursdays a Find Me a Therapist segment that he does, I believe, where he walks people through. He finds someone, if I recall, in chat, if they're willing to kind of make it known, and he walks them through the sort of things that he looks for and would advise, which is basically getting a feel, going through the people in the area, getting a feel for whether, just at the profile level, do you think you'd vibe with them? Here's some options. Do they match the kind of the specialty you're looking for? Those sort of things. But if that's something you want help with, I know that Dr. Mick I think you do it privately as well, don't you? Where you're willing to help people. They can message and stuff. Is there anything just on the like a general level you want to say, or do you want to just kind of plug the idea? But yeah,
I should clarify.
Go.
It's a bi-weekly segment.
Oh,
Do it which some people who are in, regulars in my community are like, oh, cool. Because I just decided that yesterday. It's gonna be bi-weekly now. It used to be monthly. It's gonna be bi-weekly now.
Okay,
It's
cool.
of the popularity of it.
Right.
But basically, the best tip I could give, I do that segment. I do it to teach people how to find a therapist and to kind of make that process less scary, because it is a scary process. And most people, you're never taught how to do it. And it's really vulnerable to do. The best advice I could give in general here, if you're trying to find a therapist, is there's a level of filtering you need to do. First is you need to filter by your insurance if you want to use insurance, but or by how much you can afford. But then the most important thing you can do when you are looking for therapists is trust your gut. And I say this all the time when I do the Find Me a Therapist segment, is like, your gut is truly the best indicator. Not just like, I'm not talking about like, I'm anxious about seeing a therapist, so I'm going to say no to all of them. I'm not talking about that gut. I'm talking about when you read the profile or you talk to the person on the phone, what's it like? Because if you feel yourself being at odds with that person just by reading their profile or by talking to them on the phone, move on, find something else. Now, I recognize some areas you're limited, but right now you've got a lot of options because teletherapy is being reimbursed by insurance companies more than it ever has ever. And so teletherapy is actually available. But check vibes. But I do encourage people, like, if that is a process that's scary to you, I really do encourage you to come check out that stream because I know that it has helped a lot of people find a therapist and kind of see that process as being less scary. I do not save the VODs for it out of respect for the people
Hmm.
that participate and out of respect for the profiles that I evaluate. So it's something that you do unfortunately have to catch live because I don't save the VODs. Um, but that is one way to help as well. But I do help people through DMs all the time. Send me a DM. I'll ask you for some basic information and I'll run a search for you. I'm happy to do it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I've caught one of the segments. I haven't been able to catch too many of them, but they're, it was really interesting to kind of see and go through. And some of it's I would say, it's like you said, it's almost it's stuff that isn't necessarily rocket science, but you help to make it less oppressive or less scary, I guess.
Hmm.
Just take some of the fear out of it. But it's, I mean, at the end of the day, it's, does this person give you a good feeling? Does it, do they match what you're trying to do? Is it the right specialty? Is it the right location? Is it, do you look at
All
them and
of
you're
it.
like, I don't want to talk to this little old granny lady, or maybe you do. Like the idea of a sweet old grandmother just listening to your problems is exactly what you're looking for, whatever that vibe is, and that's where the personalization comes in. But yeah,
It's
go ahead.
it's totally okay to have preferences. I really like I hit this point home a lot when I do this segment, but like if you want to have a therapist with a certain gender identity, fine. If you want your therapist to have a certain race ethnicity, fine. If you want them to be a certain age, fine. All of the above, totally fine. Like you need to go with what you are comfortable with. It does not make you a misogynist if you want to have therapy with a male therapist. If it's going to make it more comfortable for you to be vulnerable and open up, awesome, because if it's going to make you go to therapy, that's more therapy than you were going to be doing in the first place. So I really have to emphasize that for people because sometimes people get all up in their heads about whether it's okay to have preferences for therapists, and it is. It's 100% okay.
Well, first off, as the last part, I will say, right now I have 69 queued messages, so nice.
Oh my god, nice. Nice.
But nice.
Nice.
But for the last one, let's give a very, very broad lob here. How can you rediscover hope when life has seemed stacked against you? Chronic pain, constant change, professional support, nothing that helps you progress or adapt. Take it away,
Oh,
bud. Just a nice, simple
wow.
softball, yeah.
um I think it's a two-part process. I think the first is to acknowledge the pain that comes along with that question, um, and to not appreciate it. That's maybe the wrong word, but to validate. Like that's painful,
Recognize it.
and there are people that really take a lot of licks in life, and things just don't work out their way, and for factors that are out of their control or whatnot. Like I really think having a lot of patience and kindness that is self-directed in that is really important because that is a thing you can control. You can control the voice that you use to speak to yourself, and I will die on that hill. Um, and I think that's an important part. I think the thing about finding hopefulness is it depends for a person on how you define hopefulness and what instills a sense of hope within you. I think if we rely too much on the external to fuel the sense of hopeless or help to fuel the sense of hopefulness we have, then you're basically improvising and you're operating as a reaction to what's happening in the environment. Whereas I think directing that focus toward what am I hopeful about in me, what are some decisions that I want to make? What are some things that I have some influence over that would give me hope if I exerted that influence? I think that can sometimes be a good place to find it. But I think hopefulness it, it can be quite fleeting if you have a lot of data that says don't be hopeful because things are going to go wrong. But I think anything good that's going to happen that's within your control is only going to happen if you do the thing that you need to do in order to make that happen. It's sort of like a simultaneous resignation to how will the things that are out of my control influence me, but can I trust and build my ability to react to what happens, or even be proactive in some instances and really sitting down and taking inventory of what would give me hope and what part of that do I have influence over. That's the best general answer I can give without knowing more about a person's specific situation and what's fueling that sense of hopelessness and what they've gone through or whatever. But I will say anecdotally, I have talked to people who are literally at rock bottom. I have talked to people who were literally holding the weapon they were going to use to end their life. And I've also just talked with people who are in the darkest moments of their life. And I have seen so many of those people hang in there and do some of what I just talked about, who now have maybe not, the most awesomely fulfilling life, but would absolutely tell you that they are in a better place than they were at that point in time. So in the same way that Zine, that you have said many times, like it can get better and we can react and we've gotten through what you've gotten through to this point. Like it is possible to get there. But I also think like hopefulness should not necessarily be the fuel so much as goals and a sense of like discipline and directness and where you want to go. You can kind of make your own hopefulness.
Okay,
So
so first of all, I had a rousing speech planned, and you just took like three-quarters of it away. So thank you for that. I was just like, yeah, we're gonna try. Okay, I can't use that. All right, now I'm over here like all I've got is like these three pieces or something like that. Like all that's left. But I would say as well. There's one thing that I know talking to therapists, talking to my doctors, to family members who are nurses and medical professional, one of the most common themes is just people's capacity to survive, to handle the most egregious of shit and the most horrific of things and come out of it and learn to rebuild and learn to regrow. And there's no reason to think that you can't be one of those people. Well, no matter what you've gone through, you've gotten this far by being the badass that you are, and like you should be proud of yourself for having made it to this point, to this conversation, to having, as far as you are, despite the circumstances that you're facing, despite the things that you have in front of you. You get to kind of decide what your goals are and what your levels are for happiness and where that is. And so it might be, as you said, that there's some people that just have it rougher than others, and we're not all on the same scale. But you still can. Things change and they do improve, and so many people that have been at that point of hopelessness, of loss and of despair, even you find them a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, and they've built a life around that circumstance, or despite it, and they find that hope and they find that purpose and joy. And maybe it's not as high as you might have once, sought after. It might be that you got, injured in a car accident and paralyzed from the waist down, and you were seeing yourself as an athlete, and that dream, what you saw for your life might have been taken away, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing else left in your life. So continue to push, continue to be the badass that you are, and recognize that there are a tremendous number of people and a tremendous number of ways to support and find to find help, and people that will listen, that will care, and will do what they can to get you there. But most importantly, you have yourself to push yourself forward, and as long as you've got you working on your side, then you really don't have a possibility of failing. Anything you want to close up with, Dr. Mick?
um I just want to appreciate how many people have like stuck through and watched this and been a part of. I mean, I've been watching chat as we've been talking, and I am so uh I admire very much the community that you've built, because all of the people in chat right now are awesome. Like it's amazing to see how open everybody is, how vulnerable some people have been. Some of these questions have just been, I mean, they're incredible. And I know we didn't get to all of them, obviously, because there's a bazillion of them in there. But I just really want to acknowledge everybody who's watching right now, of like, thanks for giving us a chance to talk about this. I hope it's been helpful in some way. I think this is a cool ass dynamic, man. Like it just works, and I appreciate you for bringing me back on again, because this is really fun for me. I really enjoy these, and I'm honored that you're willing to bring me into this because I don't take it for granted because of how amazing this community you've built is. And I appreciate you and everybody in here right now for being here. And this is awesome. And these types of communities give me lots of hope, and I hope lots more people can find that, because this is the kind of place that makes you feel better about what you're capable of and what you can do, and just the amount of support's incredible. So you've built a really cool thing here, dude, and I really appreciate you bringing me in.
I appreciate you coming, and obviously the kind words, of course. But I appreciate you in some ways, lending legitimacy to what I'm trying to do. That's appreciated. But more importantly, I just like your perspective and your views and your, as I've said, eloquence before. I love hearing you articulate things that I've struggled to find, and defining concepts that I've seen but wondered about, or even never even thought about before. And so I just appreciate you spending your time, literally hours out of your day, to come and talk to us and to help support us. As far as my community, it's becoming clear to me, in many ways, that quite possibly my community is my life's work, and what I've built up to, and what I singularly most proud of and most appreciate in my life. So, but it's up to them to show up and to be a part of it, to be interested in engaging, to ask the questions, to want to pursue betterment for themselves, and to care enough to try and help betterment of others. It's amazing, and it's a very emotional, soul searching experience for me. But thank you for being a part of it, and thank you for what you've done, and all of those things. So. With that, my friend, I will let you go and embrace your wall, and we can wrap up here.
Cool.
Guys, be sure you're following. Check out DrMickLive. He has a YouTube channel where he posts many different conversations and things, that segments to help more specific topics and to kind of expand on them. He has a Twitter, which he has figured out how to schedule stuff on, and so has interesting bits going up on all the time. And then of course his Twitch channel as well, which twitch.tv/DrMickLive, twitter.com/DrMickLive, I believe, and then youtube.com/UX34. I don't know. I think you have one of the long.
No, I have a good one. I have a C/DrMickLive.
C/DrMickLive. There you go. It's not a good one where it's just /Zine, but it's pretty close. So
working on it.
Thank you so much for being here, dude. I love talking to you and appreciate you more than I can express. So thank you,
man.
And have yourself a good one.
Good night, friends.
All right. Let me see about closing this. Oh, right. Our stream. Our battle. I might have claimed you all. Okay. The battle's a little overdue, I admit. Sorry. Forgot about the battle. Stream Raiders. Hey, how about that, Stream Raiders? It was okay. It looks like we're gonna win. I'm sorry, guys. Good night, Dr. Mick. Thank you so much. Here's the Stream Raiders battle. Let's get it out of the way. You are all fantastic for being here. Thank you so much. I hope you learned something. I hope you might feel a little bit better. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact us. You are welcome to @ us or DM us or whatever. But huge shout out to Dr. Mick, and like, I mean, we have a great community here, and we help to drive the conversation. But without a pillar like him, then it's just me babbling in the wind. So I really do appreciate all of what he does. And hey, we won after 4 hours of preparation. We came through. So well done on us. And here, let me give everybody as much gold as I can. We have Buster Skins, to EKEB, Pi Squared, FB, Noe, Bob Taylor. We have Healer Skins, or excuse me, not Skins, Scrolls, to Neo Pyrite, Sundraken, Guardian Dr. T, Bioshark, Kiwi, Steven Stone, Shan the Fan, Miss Mina, and Techie Gamer. So well done. I think that's our only one for the night. A little bit delayed, and I apologize, but here we are all the same. All right. So I will be back tomorrow with the Vactors and more gaming and all of that. But I really mean it when I just say that I appreciate all of you. And the words can't even begin to describe. I will be watching the VOD back. And if there's things that I need to feel like I need to reach out on directly, then I'll DM you as soon as I am able. In the meantime, thank you so much for anyone. If you resubscribed, I see Delta throwing out gift subs. I see bits. And like I would do individual callouts, but that's not really the mood of the night. And so I just understand. I will look through them. I will see them, and I will appreciate you greatly for that. But otherwise, hang out to the end of the outro, guys, and we will be. Let's see. I'll find us somewhere to go, and yeah, all the usual things. It's exhausting, but I love it, and I love you guys. Thank you all for being here. Have yourself a lovely night, and see you all tomorrow. And if you want, hang out for the outro. Good night, everybody.